Do we have our screens working?
Not true in Utah.
Should be showing that computer.
It wasn't as bad as you thought, huh?
Oh. Yes, no? Yeah, they're all off right now.
I think that drives
It's
up
showing
the
that
price.
computer's second screen. But, so she'd have to drag something over to the other screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
You'll get it, just
There were some,
you'll get it.
the thing is, like, you just
Usually we
realize,
see that,
like,
that's why I was
the
asking.
little things.
Andy, you
like,
know what?
I came in here and I had
It's my birthday and I'm here at Planning Commission.
things that we could kind of work
So
on.
just leave me alone.
We need to see happy
Hey, 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 hey.
Is that allowed?
No, I like you. You stop it.
Friends. We have to see
I'd like to welcome everyone out to the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. And we'll call the meeting to order. We're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance by Dallin and Trent. Dallin Trent, sorry.
Ready, begin.
Thank you so much. And we do have a full quorum today. Turning to the Planning Commission, do we have any conflicts of interest with any of the items on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we will move on to our administrative items. And we do have, let me double check, we do have one item on for public hearing. So I do want to read the public hearing policy and procedure. The purpose of public hearings is to allow citizens to address items on the agenda. Citizens requesting to address the commission will be asked to complete a written comment form and present it to Wendy Thorpe, Deputy City Recorder. In general, you will be allowed, an individual will be allowed 2 minutes to address the commission. A spokesperson recognized as representing a group in attendance may be allowed up to 5 minutes. And this policy applies to all public hearings. So we'll move on to item 3.1, one of the administrative items, which is a request for conditional use approval for an indoor-outdoor recreation center known as Game Point, including site plan and building elevations, and we'll turn to the city staff.
All right. So, Game Point, we've talked about this several times. So they are back on tonight for a decision, if you are ready. The applicant's here if you've got any questions. I will go through it again. Nothing has changed really since the last time you saw it. Again, this is the site here. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, so it's hard to explain. This is Mountain View Corridor. This is where they're building Main Street right now. This is the site plan. Again, if you remember last time, they were able to slide the building back a little bit, get a little more parking up front, added all the landscaping around the building and around the whole site that was required. It doesn't like me. There it goes. So again, these are just details of the miniature golf course. And then the new elevations, again, which you saw last time. So, did you want to see the inside? There you go, sorry.
Oh, we hadn't seen that.
Yeah. So the applicant is here. They also submitted, which I will pull over here for you. Wow, is this going to work? Magical. There was some, this was just to show you that how much parking they had. They have 258 stalls, that they meet their landscaping percentages. And then they've been working on the grading of the site quite a bit. I think that was the one change that got made to the site, and maybe the applicant can explain that, was some of the grading, as I mentioned, kind of pushed the building a little bit. There was a little more walls here than they thought they were going to need. That's what I've got. If you have any questions for the applicant.
All right, thank you. If the applicant's present, they can come up and share any more information.
Good evening, Commission. My name's Tyler Bodrero, 3248 South, 750 West, Syracuse. Aaron Osmond is not here tonight. He got called out of town on business and asked that I fill in. So he had mentioned, he wanted to share this information, as Bryn talked about, with all the conceptual information that we've brought with, and we've been working on over the past months with the site plan and the elevations. This is going through a point which it will go through full design, but as they've been actually cutting in the miniature golf course and looking at the grading plan that Bren mentioned, one of the things that happened end of last week was they felt the need to maybe just move the building to the northeast up and shift that row of parking, maybe some parking in the back. Aaron had indicated that as he was reviewing with the designers, the grading, the slope, the drainage, and maybe some construction costs, there's about, the building will change about 2,000 square feet in size, and that's partially due to the relocation of the restaurant inside to the front. In addition, the steep grading on the west property line towards Main Street, it appears that we will need to move the building footprint to the east and place a small retaining wall and parking along that west side of the building. We're still working through some of these changes with the design team, but he wanted to make those aware to you tonight. He asked that despite the changes, we would like to proceed with the general conceptual improvement, the development agreement, and then complete the purchase of the ground. He indicates that the general plan itself and the design approach has not changed, but he would like to ask your permission tonight to authorize staff to review and approve any final changes within the guidelines that you set that may be due to the actual function of the interior of the building, which is causing the restaurant to kind of change location, shifting of the building due to grading. Overall parking, I think, only changed by about 2 parking stalls when he looked at moving the building and taking some of that parking to the other side of the building. So as this continues to progress, for lack of a better word, the catch-22 of the further they get into design, the more criteria that they find with the grading and the layout and some of the functions of the interior components, such as the restaurant. And as that continues to go, it's just being posed to the commission tonight of your general feeling as to whether or not we continue to track some of these minor changes that don't really affect the overall design approach or plan approach, and whether or not the commission would feel comfortable in approving it as it is tonight, allowing staff to work through any of these design changes or minor changes to the project. But that's all I have, unless you have any questions.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions for the applicant from the Planning Commission?
Yeah, I do have a couple. So this, what we're looking at on screen, is the adjustment that's been made that you said from Friday?
This is where things were as of Friday.
Friday, yeah.
So you mentioned additional parking on the west side. I'm not quite following. That's not the west side of the building then? 'Cause
Well,
it's not
so if you're
showing
looking
any-
north, so
Yeah.
the majority of that parking is on the north west side
Okay.
of the building. So if the building shifted up, which
All right.
would be north,
Yeah, kind of northeast is the way.
northeast, right,
It-
some of that parking that would then be moved to the back. But as he did this grading plan on Friday, late Thursday night, Friday morning, realized that some of the grades were requiring some things that a little retaining wall and moving that solved that.
So you said moving parking to the back. You just mentioned that. I guess I
So-
want to make sure, because
Right.
I'm not seeing anything around the building, which is good. I don't want that, but.
Right. Essentially shifting that front row of parking, I think it shifted 30 or 40 feet. So
Okay.
I think that drive approach would shift, and then that row of parking, well, not necessarily the row with the parking up against the building would stay the same. It would be that island.
That right there, that 4 stall that she's pointing at. Maybe you can't see it.
Yeah, and if you went up and counted those
Okay.
30 stalls, does it say? 17 and,
I know there was 2 or 3
Okay.
stalls
So
through
I
here
just
that
wanna
got
make
lost
sure. I want to make sure
as they
that, yeah.
shifted up, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because I heard back, I did not want them in the back, we talked about
Don't want
that.
'em back
So
here.
if this is the current layout, I guess I don't have any concerns with what's just want to make sure that this is the current layout.
I did want some clarification. You mentioned 2,000 square feet change in building. You're just talking about the location, not the footprint or size of the building.
The size of the building will change by about 2,000 square feet. It will be reduced by about 2,000 square feet.
Okay, can you explain that? Where and how?
Well, the kitchen, my understanding, and I haven't seen it all laid out, but the design of the kitchen would move up towards the front entrance of the building.
Because the restaurant's kind of back here right now.
And it would be up left of that entrance, I think further down.
We're seeing your pointer.
Well, he sees it up there.
Okay.
And by so doing, the square foot, the footprint, and I think maybe that's some area maybe taken out of the lobby or some of that open space. But it would be between the entry and the bowling alley, so it's actually, yeah, left of your arrow, right, yeah. So that,
Over in
so,
here?
so where the restaurant was, yeah, back and in the corner, it would be up. Yep, between the bowling and I think where you reduce some of that square footage, if you remember, there was a big long corridor along the back of the building that allowed the kitchen to connect and serve food to the bowling alley. And that corridor basically goes away because the kitchen has direct connectivity now to the bowling alley.
Okay.
And so I think a lot of that was kind of useless space, and I think that was a design change based on some cost considerations, looking at square foot reduction.
All right.
So just some optimization then, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the commission. We've seen a lot of iterations, and I think these last few you've been seeing have really been kind of minor. The general look and feel and getting our arms around the parking and where that future building lot would be and kind of that future drive-through and where the building would be and how the traffic would pass through. All of that, and I think he recalced the percentage of detention was minor. So there's really minor changes happening with this site movement, slightly shifting the building to the northwest and shifting, reducing some square footage on site. So if the commission feels they'd like to see all this roll through and design changes and plans and come before you, we're happy to do that. Aaron felt that the general plan and design approach hasn't changed, and if you're comfortable turning that to staff to review and handle the last few design changes before we get 100% permit plans to submit for permit. Yeah, just like your feedback on thoughts as we continue to go forward.
So Tyler, did the restaurant move or just the kitchen? Do you know? The restaurant itself? Because I know the restaurant had that separate entrance and access off that we really liked.
The patio and the
The
entrance and
patio
everything out
area
there,
and the-
yeah.
I think that changes. I think that moves. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have an actual drawing in front of you, but as they were going through that, yeah, that was a minor change.
Nothing else.
All right. Anything else from the planning commission before we discuss? All right, thank you so much.
You bet.
You can have a seat for now. So there's a couple points that I noticed. One, in item 5, it says the design guidelines approved as submitted. At this point, I feel like there's a handful of changes that I'm not sure where it's going to be. Because if it does change, it has the potential of changing the whole side where the restaurant is. Is that going to change the fill drastic enough to where we want it to come back? I guess is one of my questions. Or do we feel comfortable that it'll keep the same fill? And granted, it does go to city council for building elevations as well. The other one is the future building, because it is included in this. Just I feel comfortable in or needing to add that 10,000 square foot building will comply with the city's design standards and not with these. So with the amount of stone or brick on the front, et cetera. Those were the couple thoughts I had.
What can come back to us, Bryn? What aspect of this can come back to us if we still want to move forward and not
Whatever
hold this up?
Whatever we
Whatever
tell
you
them.
want. I mean, you can
Whatever we
certainly
tell 'em.
approve all of it, like I said, and then if the changes are, then we'll bring it back. I would still let it get to council, you know what I mean, and let them see it and move forward. And then as we go through final, like we said, which is typical, you know, as you're moving through the final plans, things are gonna shift around a little bit, and we can bring them back to you if they
Well, and I
do.
guess that's my question to you as well, is how comfortable is staff making sure that, you know, little tweaks and adjustments here, you guys are comfortable with?
Yeah,
and
that
you
is
know, I mean,
very
that's-
common,
yeah,
that we do
right.
that. You know, anything, where we have maybe a trigger is if you make a decision and, you know, staff report includes a number of conditions, and let's say that in making a change between preliminary and final, there's something that is contrary to a condition, something that you have spelled out, then that would be a flag saying, we've got to bring that back to the commission and get the commission to either say, yes, you're okay making that change, we'll modify our condition of approval, or no, we're not comfortable with that, you need to comply with the conditions that we previously specified. You know, so as long as the changes from preliminary to final are not in conflict with zoning code, they keep the spirit and intent of what the planning commission had approved and did not violate any of the conditions of approval, we would administrate those changes at the staff level. And that's very, very common. And again, as Bryn was saying, that if you recommend approval tonight and you want to see the final plan come back before you at a future meeting, we can certainly do that too.
So these recommendations that were made in the report here was prior to these changes, correct?
Yes, that's true.
So, or would any of these recommendations?
I don't think any of them would change.
Would
no.
change based on what they're now proposing? Okay.
Because I am concerned that,
Design guidelines are generic enough
Yeah.
as well. They're not specific to, you know, any of these little changes that you've heard tonight.
because I'm not concerned, because the kitchen, you know, restaurant, I don't have a problem with it moving, but I think that's going to change that whole, it would be
That patio on
that
that side
patio,
and
that whole
stuff.
view, that whole, I mean, I think, because that was designed a lot around that restaurant and that entrance. Again, Aaron's been very upfront with it and very good. I haven't been disappointed with any of his concepts, so I'm not concerned. But I want to make sure if we do,
But if this is truly the current layout, that patio is still where it was, where he had always, and again, we can
it's showing a
make that-
patio there,
it's
but
showing
if
it
the
that-
restaurant's not there, then
It's going to move.
it's something, I mean, there
Again,
won't,
maybe make that one of the triggers, right?
Right.
If anything changes to the patio or something like that, then, you know, we could bring it back.
And I know item 4 and item 5 in the requirements says building elevations, it's approved as submitted. Both of them say as submitted, and right now, this isn't what's going to be submitted. And so,
So can
I
we-
do think we need to, if we move forward, we have to adjust that at least. Because we're talking about the elevations and the design guidelines as submitted today, which is not going to be what it ends
So
up being.
again, if there is an elevation change based on any reprogramming of the floor plan, then they would come back to you for a revision.
Yeah,
You would still have that control.
okay.
And also, the fact is, the elevations are just a recommendation to the council. Because you're making an exception, they are actually approving the elevations. Yeah. So they may make changes to them when it gets to them, and that
they
would
could
never
see
come
these
back to you
changes,
anyway.
so they could see the changes
They'll
by
see the
next
change,
week,
yeah.
and
All right.
So your main concern is just the future building meets city requirements?
Yeah, the future building will meet the city design standards, commercial design standards, I guess, guidelines.
Because personally, I'd like to see this just keep moving. If there's a way we can make a motion
Absolutely,
tonight
yeah.
and keep things going, and,
Exactly.
but still protect us, you know, that there's not anything significant going
Well,
on.
it feels like we still have the controls to bring it back.
Right.
He has been at the last 3 meetings, so.
Yeah. We love Aaron, but yeah.
I'd like to make a motion to approve item 3.1 with the recommendation that the future building meets city standards.
Meet city commercial design standards?
Yeah.
and all staff guidelines. staff
And all
Oh,
recommendations.
yeah, and all the recommendations, sorry.
I'll second it.
All right, we had a motion by Brody, a second by Lauren. We'll call for a vote. Brody?
Yes.
Kobe?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
And Andrew?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. We'll now move on to item 3.2, which is a request for preliminary plot approval for 259 residential units in Harriman Town Center, known as Parkside. This is on for a public hearing, and I think, Bryn, you mentioned this will probably be continued at this point as well. Okay, so we'll let Bryn or the city staff talk about this, and then we'll hear from the applicant, and then we'll open the public hearing, though.
So we've had this one on a couple times too. So tonight, this will be a public hearing. The applicant is here. This is again for the last real residential phase in the town center, which is just south of us here on this, I'll call it the Y Road because I can. So again, they're going to go through, and I'm suggesting we talk about 3.2 and 3.3 at the same time. They're, you know, virtually the same thing. One is the plat, one is the site plan. The plat is the public hearing, though. So the applicant, you had a special work meeting with them a couple weeks ago. They have made changes to hopefully address the items that you brought up. So probably just can let them go through with their changes and then have a public hearing, and then again, give them any additional feedback, and then we'll bring it back for a decision in a couple weeks.
All right, thank you, Bryn. If the applicant's present, if you want to just state your name, please.
Steve Maddox, Edge Homes, Draper, Utah. We had a work session 2 weeks ago. We missed one of you. We have taken into account copious amounts of notes and have tried to apply these as much as possible. So if Bryn could just go through the slide deck. The first item was that we began to address the parking, specifically the driveways. And I wanted to just point out, we were originally at 35% open space with 6.1 acres. The revision to our driveways reduced that by almost a full acre. All of the amenities, the question was asked by Mrs. Bradford as to whether the amenities would stay intact. So everything that we presented on the original proposal has stayed intact. There's been a pinching or a diminishing of some of the grass and other open space. So we color-coded, which looks a little pixelated here. All of the driveways that were originally at 18 feet, we have had 44 of those on this portion go to 22 feet, 23 feet, 43 of those. And then we have some that are from 24 to 26. We have about 40 of those. So there's a third, and a third. We are not going to restrict through CCNRs these driveways, but this should accommodate all exceptions of anything hanging out further than an F-350. And then on the east side, same ratio, 22, 23, and 24 on those ratios.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt, but the driveways, and I just want to make sure it's clear, does not encroach on sidewalk. There's an adjacent sidewalk, the driveway width is that, and then sidewalk is additional.
Yes.
I just for clarification.
Yes.
Thank you.
So everything that is private drives. The next item that we addressed, are there any other questions on the driveways?
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Okay. One of the questions that was asked is, what is the actual aggregate parking in the area? Mr. Bradshaw and I will share cross easements with private roads and parking. If you look at the top of the screen, which is about 200 commercial stalls available for overflow parking, which will be harmonious with evening, where the commercial would be closed down after potentially 10 o'clock. The parking stalls that are on the radius will be at 86. Those are striped currently. One of the deficiencies that we saw that will probably need to be put in place is ADA compliant stalls, which don't seem to be addressed currently. With the live-work combination, we probably will need to reduce a portion of those. And then the blue hashing that you see throughout the project would be parallel parking, parallel public parking on Copeland and Summerdale Drive. And everything internal would be private, but parking for residents, and then Fort Harriman. Those break out to 47, 34, and 56 based on a 20-foot wide parking stall. In one of the meetings that we had, it was talked about whether we should stripe these, not stripe these, have something on the curb. As far as we're concerned, we will just leave it as is unless we have recommendation from staff. So the total space required in this overlay is 518. Maximum spaces for the ordinance is 120, which would be 621 stalls. We meet that. The ancillary parking that we've addressed is about 278 stalls. The external parking along the frontage, which would be public roads, is 223, and then the commercial overflow would be 200. This is an area, which is a transitional area that Adam was concerned about with those backyards. We wanted to show what that actually would look like in conjunction with the commercial. So this is really our transition, the only area that's in transition. There's been talk about how we're going to transition there, and this felt very natural. So on the top of the screen, you have the garaged units. There's a trash collection area there, and then a 4-door Dodge pickup truck in that parking stall, and then some grass and some greenery that would be a transition area. This is a mock-up of what the landscaping will look like, and of course, as part of our submittal, we would have that. And the backs of the buildings, in full disclosures, have not been approved by Planning Commission, so this is for artist rendering only.
You know, that would have been priceless if it was a blue truck. That's what I
Brandon's
drive.
fault. I told him blue. Okay. This is where it got a little bit fun because once again, we went back to the architect's office and we looked at a way of incorporating, starting at the base level, which was covered porches. I believe that accentuated it dramatically. And then as we moved up to the second floor, we created some balconies and a door. And then we've kept with a theme that we are going to do the awnings and then have staff approve any type of lettering that would be on those units. The other item that we'll have in greater detail is on the other side of the building, even on the interior. We did a mock of what that bay would be. It's not as large as the other side, which is prominent on a corner, and then we raised the caps on those ends by about 18 inches to pronounce those corners at even greater depth. Any questions on the architecture?
I don't on the front. I know we mentioned potentially having like patios on the back or balcony type patio on the back as well.
We'll get to the back.
Okay, cool. And then on the front, even though it's landscaping, we talked about having the trees the same width and potential same design as the rest of the commercial, so it flows all the way around.
Yeah, so this would be the stem of the Y Road, which already has a sidewalk incorporated, and this is the park strip that is already in place. And then I've got another slide in here that would show where we were doing the sidewalk incorporated with the grates and the trees within there.
Awesome.
Spacing of 30 feet.
So you're telling me just be quiet and watch?
No, I can't do that.
Yes, you can, Steve.
We
do all the time.
These are the ends of the buildings. We have presented to staff, and we'll show you a mock-up of this, of 3 different brick types. This would be in harmony with the building right here as close as we can on a residential brick application, and then white accents congruent through the whole project. These trees will be spaced every 30 feet, and then we will work with Heather, I believe, Heidi, thank you, that will determine the types of trees, and they will be congruent through the entire project. So these are the 2 brick colors that we're talking about, and this would be where the Y actually is, and these are the trees and the grates that Mike has volunteered to work with me on to determine how we're going to do those, and then that will tie into the commercial component that Mike Bradshaw will be doing. These are the brick colors, the old school brick that we would like to do, a more red brick, and then one that is a little darker that looks more in line with what we're doing here. The other item is the peninsula there, excuse me, that's greened up, currently sits vacant. We have not seen anything at a city level that has said what those are going to look like. We would propose that we include that in what we do and hook that to our irrigation system and maintain that through an HOA that would be responsible for that. One of the items that we would like to defer to the city is not to restrict any public parking or have anything to do with signage, and if and when that need arises to control the parking on all public and private areas that Mr. Bradshaw will have can be determined as needed and when needed. We had originally made a proposal that we would restrict parking at 10:30 at night and boot people and tow them and become the parking enforcement agency. And we would like to let that kind of evolve as Town Center evolves. And those are your stalls, and those are at your discretion as to how and when those will be managed.
That's what we want, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
This is now, let's just go to the next slide. One of the items, we'll go to this slide. This is the back of the building. We've done some awnings. Also, those two towers that are offset on the center, we've pulled that building out and created a little bit of relief on that building. The brick will go all the way down to the ground. And then we've created some balconies off of the back there. Next. This is a picture of our alley load townhomes. This is the side view from the exterior of the Y Road, so we try to have those front, the neighbors that are adjacent to us. We've noticed that some of the single-family homes that are adjacent to us are not fronting the road, so we are just trying to draw the community more into and not away from. And then this is the area that we discussed. So we have pulled that entire brick wall out to align with the fronts of those buildings. It's created a larger courtyard interior, and then we've aligned the buildings on each one of those corners to tie in to give that look and feel of what that corner will be. So
Is that tall enough for you, Chris? Just kidding. Carry on.
we are convinced that Chris will like this at some point, because I have dug in on this one, because I just feel like I don't want to go to the park with my kids and spend all day, but I can work across the street. So that also ties in, if you'll go back one, Bryn, please. This also ties in a commercial element on those two corners that will be able to have a little bit of what you've talked to Mike about, of having that business perhaps leak out into those areas. And so that transition of commercial. The other thing that I wanted to point out is we have 24 live-work units that will be provided that seem to be a number that is sustainable and not going to interfere with what Mike Bradshaw is concerned about, of having too much commercial and having vacancies. So this has evolved dramatically, and I think this centerpiece here has changed dramatically on the corners of the buildings and what is here. I hope you find it to your liking. We have included trees, not to disguise or hide, but to just show what the reality of what the streetscape will look like. And this is looking in front of the park itself at what those corners of the buildings will look like, and the vestibules that we've created on the corner, and just what that streetscape will eventually look like. This is the interior of that area, looking at just an angle from inside of the building. One of the objectives that we had from Planning Commission was to make sure that this project had pedestrian traffic to and through. So all of these walkways that we've created to allow residents that live adjacent and are pertinent to what we're doing will be able to transition very comfortably. And I think that's a flight attendant that we have there walking through the park. I don't know what Brandon has done there.
She lives and works there.
Yeah. So what we have is all private amenities within the project, and we would assume the responsibility of irrigation through here, because to our knowledge that has not been run. So that would address the items that I believe we discussed in grave detail at our last work session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for the applicant from the Planning Commission at this time? No?
We'll just
All
go
right,
through the
abs-
slides.
At this time, I will open this up for the public hearing. If there's anyone here who would like to come up, and you will have 2 minutes to share with us your thoughts. It's okay, just come up and state your name, and then we will ask you to fill something out at the end and just give it to Wendy over here.
Okay. I'm a first home buyer. This is my first public hearing. I didn't even realize this kind of was open to me. I certainly don't want to be negative. I'm just very surprised at how noisy my neighborhood is, with how small it is in this townhouse community that I'm in. And with adding 259 units, I'm concerned about noise pollution as well as traffic. Traffic is already not terrible by any means, but it's definitely a concern of mine, just with how the streets and everything would be laid out. With the homeowners association, will they have rules when it comes to like animals or dogs? And the only reason I ask that is I already have neighbors that leave their dogs outside, and with patios and whatnot, we all know that homeowner or neighbor that kind of leaves their dogs out, and it drives you crazy. And that's kind of just some concerns that I had, and just wanted to bring that up to everyone.
Can you state your name, please? We
I'm
for the
so
record.
sorry.
You're good.
Patty Amthor.
Thank you.
So,
All right, thank you so much.
okay, thank you.
Darrell Larson, Harriman. I'm glad to see that they did make some of the changes, addressing some of the parking and design issues. But there was an issue that was brought up by the commission I'd like to speak on, is the idea of some of these raised areas around pedestrian crossings to make that easier. And I know the street maintenance people and snowplow people don't like these speed tables, as they're technically called, or speed bumps and that, they're hard to work around, they are an inconvenience. But again, looking at the traffic flow and some of the speeding that I see going along Copeland and that, I am concerned about the safety factor of that. And even though it's an inconvenience, to some of the city people, to me, it'd be far more inconvenient to try and explain to a parent, in a hospital with a child, why maybe there are some ideas that we could have done to prevent an accident were basically given away because some of these safety ideas are inconvenient. To me, safety needs to come first on some of these issues. And being along Copeland, where it was kind of brought up to be, I'm probably going to be one of those who's going to be bumping over that thing more than hardly anybody else in the area. So,
Thank you so much.
Well, the first woman was very brave. Same situation, just kind of seeing what this is like, and just wanted to voice my concern. Is one of the reasons I moved to the area which I live, just a few minute walk from here. One of the reasons I moved there is because of the variety of different homes that were in that area. I'm in a townhome, and I liked that through like my neighbor's backyard, I can see single family homes, and I can walk this way and see single family homes, and there are townhomes on my street that are from a different builder. And one of probably my biggest concerns when I was made aware of this plan was just that one builder typically has like one kind of exterior look, even if you're changing colors. As a homeowner, I typically like to see more variety. And that's my biggest concern with this proposal, is two very large communities from the same builder with, I haven't seen all of the exteriors, but I imagine if they're all the same plan, that's just not very attractive to me, especially for the city, the center of my city. Clark Ragsdale, sorry.
Thank you so much.
My name is Jacob Jackson. Similar deal, very new homeowner. But I just live in Harriman as well, just to the east of the park. And one concern that I had as well when I received a letter or a notice of this plan was when we initially moved to the location that we live in, which is just east of the park, as I mentioned, we didn't know exactly what it meant, but we heard that it was mixed use area, and this is obviously, I don't know all the specifics of how all the planning works and everything, but something that we kind of imagined was having really good access to the park since we live fairly close. We also, something that's attractive to my family and I about Harriman is a lot of green space. We've noticed even amongst lots of different, of the different areas in Harriman, there's different pathways and kind of green areas that are really help you break up all of the homes that there are, because there is quite a bit of higher density housing. And so that was a concern I had, especially being as now with this, how this is laid out, it would be between where we live and the park. So although we would be able to walk right through, it would maybe feel not quite the same as a easy green space that would give us quick access to the park. So those are some of the current concerns that we had were having green space and cutting down on the mixed use area. Although I didn't even know what that would have been before this proposal either, so I'm ignorant to that anyways. But I just wanted to bring up some of those concerns that I had and feelings to the commission as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. If there's no one else at this time, I'll close the public hearing. And do we need to close the public hearing? At this point?
You can close it, or you can continue it for a date certain, in 2 weeks.
If you wanted to
If
take more
you-
comment in 2 weeks, you could.
Yeah, if you don't continue it for a date certain, then we will have to send out another notice in the mail.
If you have another public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll turn to the Planning Commission with any thoughts on that. I know, at least from my thoughts, I think we've received a lot of comments from the community, which we appreciate. And it's been open for 2 separate times. The changes at this point, I think, are going to be very minor. So I'm comfortable with closing it, but I guess I'd like to hear the input from the rest of the Planning Commission.
I'd like to leave it open.
I'm good either way, but.
Yeah, I'd like to leave it open too.
All right, then we'll leave it open with date certain, which will be the next meeting, so in 2 weeks. So we will leave the public hearing open. And then at this time, we'll turn to the Planning Commission. I did think that it may make sense, and I don't know if the builder actually has this, because there were some questions about some of the paths, some of the green space, and I think also CCRs with some of the protection that will occur within the development that I think would be better answered by the actual builder. If he's comfortable with coming up and talking about some of that, because I know in the past you've shown the pictures of the parks that are within it and the green space that's within it, and I think some of the individuals here today, the residents, didn't get a chance to see that. So I don't know if we have some of that maybe. And maybe you can just talk about it in more detail.
We will present, I don't have the slide with me that we had last time, and I know what you're referencing. What we were charged with early on, the ERC, was to have connectivity to the adjacent community. So we have provided public access through the entire project. So all of the trails that you see that would be identified will be open to the public and a cross easement in the name of Harriman City. And the community adjacent to it will be encouraged to go to and through. The amenities themselves will be private and maintained private, so we will have to manage that with CCNRs. We hope everybody plays in the sandbox friendly. But everything that you see as far as trail, and then obviously the public sidewalks are open and adjacent to. So the last gentleman that spoke, that's been heavily considered and scrutinized to make sure that we have the connectivity. And we could provide that online and/or have that at our next meeting, which I believe would be the 17th. But all of the trails that you see on this plat are public trails, moving pedestrian traffic through.
All right, thank you. And then I'll turn to the Planning Commission for discussion.
Can we go to the first slide and kind of go through them?
Oh, that is the first.
So yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate the developer working on extending the parking. That was kind of our main concern. I don't know if there's any comments on this.
I think they encourage off-street parking, allowing larger vehicles park within the driveway. I think they really helped with this.
Yep.
And there are going to be requirements within the CCNRs, right, regarding parking and use of the garages as well correct? Not, everybody likes to put junk in their garage and use it for storage, but I think there'll be some requirements, I believe, for actual vehicles. Is that true or not? Correct me if I'm wrong.
So, yeah, there is a standard
Yeah.
in the high-density design guidelines that requires a minimum area of storage.
Yeah.
So we can make sure that they communicate that at the next meeting, how they meet that.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, next slide. Next. I don't know, from the city, anything you want to add there or any concerns?
Well, I think there was a mention of the ADA parking, right, and the handicap parking as well. So,
Yeah, we
we'd
need
be
to look at that.
incorporated.
And we have talked, and when we've met with staff and then the rest of the engineering department and stuff. I think looking at those stalls along the street, I think we agree that we'll look at that in the future and that the city would be responsible for that in the future. If it becomes an issue, we'll sign it, stripe it, meter it, whatever we decide to do in the future. But we'll just watch it at first and see kind of how it goes.
Agreed.
And then speaking on the actual crosswalks going to the park and other things like that, the raised sidewalk concept or idea. So there was, and maybe this might be another idea. So I was in Boston last week, and they had something very similar, but it was not raised. It was stamped, and it actually you could see naturally slow down traffic as well. And so it had a similar type impact on driving, but it was not raised. And so because once they saw in the driving area, here's this stamped, it looks cobblestone / brick, whatever you want to say, sidewalk area that goes across it. And I did look at it because of this meeting, and it was stamped, and so it was concrete, but it did slow the traffic down naturally.
Another, finish your thought.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at how many they had, though. There was a lot throughout the city of Boston, and it had that type of impact.
I imagine we probably have access to some studies that talk about, the effectiveness of different traffic calming tools. And perhaps we can work with engineering to determine whether or not there would be a recommendation to incorporate any of those.
Because that might be a
But
happy
we can certainly
medium,
give you
though.
some more detailed information about what generally works, better than others, so.
Along
we'll-
those
we'll
lines
provide
that,
for you.
along those lines, that crosswalk on Copeland, it'd be very easy. You show some adjacent on-street parking, it'd be very easy to put a bulb out on the,
yeah.
To shorten up the length for the pedestrians. It also slows down the traffic as well. So just something to that effect to calm traffic as well, something maybe to look at. in that
I do think we need to do something different, though, rather than just crosswalks. That's been a concern from the beginning, whether that, I don't know if that necessarily falls under Steve, but that might be a city issue, but I do think we need.
And does that fall under the developer or the city on these roads for that? I guess I'm not sure.
It's really gonna fall, because right now, for example, like speed tables and that would be against our standard. So we're gonna have to look at making some changes, and we're very open to it. We don't know what it will be, and I think we can certainly talk about that
But the
with you
bulb outs
guys
and things
later.
like that, there's other things that we can do within the standards.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, to help calm traffic
yeah.
and really make those.
But I don't know
crosswalks
that that's
pop.
necessarily gonna be on the developer. I
Right.
mean, he's happy to do whatever. But I think we need to continue talking about that with engineering and
We're
all the
holding you
different
to that.
departments and see
But
how
again,
we wanna-
that little thing I mentioned with the pop out,
Yeah,
right there,
required.
very easy
They'll do
to,
it. Yep.
On Copeland?
incorporate in something like this.
You're
to
talking on
help.
Copeland, right, Andy?
Yeah, on
I
Copeland,
think
right there.
that's,
Yeah, just to narrow up that,
Here? Nope, I'm on the wrong.
no, the
one.
crosswalk, there you go.
Over here.
No, keep going up
Nope,
where the
over
cross,
yep, those.
sorry, well,
Where?
there's those, but you've got a crosswalk there you're showing, keep going around counterclockwise, or clockwise, excuse me, keep going. Right there, you got that crosswalk right there.
Yeah.
Already. It'd be very
But we
easy
could
to,
just bump that out a little.
that's
or
right,
something, yeah.
that's exactly what I'm saying.
We've proposed 3 options: the table, the cat lights, and a crosswalk, and then concrete. If there's a dollar amount that we should pledge and then allow the city to make improvements as needed, or we can come in with whatever. We have been met with resistance for the reasons that have been cited tonight. The gentleman over here that spoke, we feel fairly compelled to do something other than just stripe lines that maybe become faded or tattered. So if we could do something permanent,
Yeah, that's
Mike and I are both committed to doing something kind of on the commercial end and then
Because we did talk
towards the
about
center.
flashy, blinky,
Cat
whatever
lights,
there, right?
and they
here.
do
Yeah,
blink, they're
yeah.
loud, they're obnoxious, but they do slow. And then, Chris, as far as stamping the concrete, that's fairly easy to do, a radius cut on the asphalt. And maybe a combination of both would be prudent in this case to make sure that the copious amounts of children are protected.
And I do have a picture.
Send it to me, we'll get it.
There you go. So,
I'm
all right.
good if you want to go to the next slide. Nothing, I don't have anything on this one.
Question here. So again, our requirements are typically when you go from a commercial into residential. Maybe this doesn't work, not apply because you're mixed use, you have to have some type of physical barrier, right, to go from one
And they're also
zone
under
to
the
the
old
next. And
code,
so
and it
it's-
wasn't required under the old code either, so.
Okay.
And I don't think I
And
want it. in
I,
this
I'm not
walkable.
saying that either, I just want to make sure that,
Yeah.
yeah, people are, it might be nice though to have some type of hedge here, just to kind of separate. I'd hate to have a backyard right there that's kind of open to everybody as well that you're
I like
seeing.
hedge.
But some type of,
And that's true, these are all residential.
no, but I'm talking across the street from, so behind the photo, you're standing, so at your back, you got the big parking lot, right? Is that not the case?
Right where you're standing right here,
Yeah,
the parking lot?
behind,
Yeah.
the person taking the picture has a, right, they're back to a parking lot, so anyhow,
Along this
that
side here.
interface, yeah, along that side, there's something I think a little bit more there, but
Maybe
yeah, it
some
could be
sort of
done with
barrier.
landscaping or just something to break it up.
I think more landscaping on the parking lot side, though. That might be
Yeah.
something we have to talk to Mike about.
Speaking to your mic, Lauren.
Is it Mike?
Matt?
Matt, no, the other, with
mic.
the,
Saying
with the
speaking to your
commercials,
mic.
on the commercial side, because that's gonna
Oh,
be
he said
under
speaking to your mic.
Mike. Test. No, the gentleman doing the commercial, I think that's something we can come back to him.
Mike Bradshaw.
Yeah, Mike Bradshaw.
Yeah, maybe it
Just
is the
maybe
commercial
some
side.
landscaping,
Yeah,
hiding that parking a little bit, like we've talked.
Just so they don't have lights into their house.
No, we totally skipped that.
We skipped that one
Yeah.
on the agenda.
We'll have to talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. Then at this time, I think,
Keep going through.
yeah,
we
oh,
can
yeah,
do.
okay.
I love the balconies. I love those balconies on the covered. I think
Yeah, the
that's-
balconies look
that's a
really good.
feature.
Bumped them out. Can you go to the next slide? Next. I just
Wanna
want to see
talk
the,
about
I want to see.
colors?
Apparently Bryn
It's
does.
hard to say. Yeah, it's hard to picture what they're actually going to look like.
You can kind of see it. There's another
That one makes, oh, sorry.
Hold on,
You go.
I'm just gonna skip, hold on.
We
This-
could
'cause
re-
you can kind of see them there too.
Oh, the
There's
three
different
colors.
colors.
We could request a materials board next meeting.
Yeah, I think the colors kind of clash.
I like it, but I grew up in the East Coast too, so brick is really common.
So do you,
I like the red brick and the dark brick. The lighter brick, not sure about. And that's one thing I wanted to kind of address is that stucco on the side of the building, where it's like brick, stucco, brick.
this in the middle
Yeah, it's a
here?
combination. The pop-out is going to be stucco, and then the primary is
Gotcha.
brick. On the colors, we had called consultants out of the state of Utah that is more familiar with the massing of a three-story building and connectivity. They felt because of the linear portion of this that a breakup would be prudent. We chose colors for a couple of reasons in this. Popularity was number one, but availability and sourcing long-term, because this won't be a one-day build, and the concern would be that we ended up with something that wasn't going to be available perhaps in 2 or 3 years. So the clashing is intentional, and it's a delineation between buildings as they do in major cities where you don't have a wall of congruity. So the clash is trying to do some separation so that you don't just have one wall of the same.
Which I agree with, maybe just,
Just maybe different colors?
maybe. The lighter one, I'm agree, it's, especially if you go back, there was one,
There's one that shows,
look out, right there, that's just white and go
Oh,
back.
the white back?
White out,
That's
I'm
the
just
back,
like,
yeah.
I
That's
know
what I was
that's
gonna
not on the Y road that we're talking about, but that just,
Even breaking that up with some different color, even like with the bump outs, I would
yeah.
use a different material so it's not, it feels flat, even though there's some dimension there because of the color.
Right.
For me, on the sides, if you go back a slide, I don't know, I feel like the stucco kind of cheapens the building. You're doing brick around most of it. I would like to see brick on the whole side of it. That's why it would.
Just on the side that's actually adjacent more to sidewalks, things like that, where it's more visible.
And I'm okay with the break of it. I do think I mean, all the brick makes it look really nice, and the stucco I think does cheapen it a little bit. I don't know if a hardy board or something else may look a little more normal with it or a little higher quality, but I'm okay with the contrast. I think there actually is a need for some contrast. Just like on the back where it's all white, I think there's a need for a contrast there. I think it actually adds to it having some contrast.
I like the contrast too, but I think we should do something other than stucco. I think a different brick or hardy board, something that just feels a little nicer. Yeah. And on this too, I remember 2 meetings ago, we talked about filling these corners like with a building or towers. Is there a reason why we steered away from that or why that's not here? Because I think that's where,
That was a
imagine
big,
seeing the auditorium and then those towers behind it, that could look really cool.
I think we did talk about raising the towers slightly on the ends and things like that, a little more than this. Though I think you do have the tower concept. I think we were just thinking a little more, a little higher or a little more accentuated.
and we did talk about the corner a lot at our last work session. So this is kind of where we came to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a deficiency in my slide, so if you notice some of the towers, we've raised them about 2.5 feet.
Okay.
The picture, the slide that you were looking at does not show that, but if you see that tower, we have raised that significantly above what the side of the
But
building
this one
is.
shows a little more so.
Yeah, there's a little.
Because the one on the right doesn't look like it's raised, but the one on the left
Yes, I
does.
have a- Yeah, I have an error in that, but if you look at the tower there, it's quite a bit higher.
Okay.
And I had another question too. How many potential like commercial units are going to be in these condo?
24 is what he said. 24, right?
The each end, so we did each end,
Each end, okay.
which I think we talked a little bit, Colby, that we didn't want to overdo the commercial.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
and I see that.
you don't want too much live work or else
Right.
it won't, I think it'll.
And so, what type of? I would like to see what Harriman needs is that we need more restaurants, we need more bakeries, we need more ice cream shops, we need more places where I can go with my family and not necessarily like an accountant shop or an accountant firm or I don't know.
I think a lot of these live works fall in that category though, while the other commercial is going to be a lot more of the restaurant or different feel is what's going to occur or what we've seen as more normal. I
Okay.
don't know if you can get a serving license within a live work like this. And so
That's more the mixed
that's
use that
not-
is just down the
yeah.
street than from these, right?
I guess I have a question for the applicant. As far as the work-live, have you looked into it much as far as enforcement to make sure that we would get those types of units versus a tenant comes in and says, I don't want to do work-live, and so I'm going to just use it for, I guess, residential?
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to say, like, I work from home, so I could call it a live-work facility, but I don't ever have customers come. And so I think some of what you look at is there is going to be potentially the option of having those, but it is really up to the individual that comes into those units
They
on
have
what they
clients.
decide. Yeah. I don't think we can have a lot of control over that part of it, unfortunately.
I think there's a bigger demand than I had originally anticipated when the crazy idea came up.
Oh, there's
and
a
as we
huge
talked-
demand. There's a huge demand.
As we talked about doing it legally and then having the tax ramification of being able to write off square footage within your home and to be able to have hours that are selected, we think we can market to that clientele once we explain. And I think having an understanding of the correlation between legality and running a business and then being able to advertise on a storefront. And then I think the parking that has already been provided is very conducive. The ice cream shops and the other items, I just want to remind everybody, Mike is concerned about building 110,000 square feet of restaurants and dress shops. This should be augment that, but not take away from the viability of a legitimate ice cream shop and restaurants, because I think that is key to this area as well, and we don't want to detract from that. So the CCNRs will control the types of businesses. We will probably exclude a little bit heavier maybe than even what the city ordinance is. There's some businesses that have popped up in my municipality that was strange. It's a gaming center where kids come after school and the guy has set up 25 screens inside, and it's just not, it's not what I want to see outside of a project that we build. So we're going to be probably more restrictive on the types of businesses and the operation of them, and then enforce through the HOA. So in some ways, we can be more restrictive than the city can be with what we allow.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Brandy, the CCRs come back through us? I can't remember.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
All right, so one more comment and question related to Harriman Town Center, but maybe Harriman City at the macro level too. I remember 2 meetings ago at the very end, Michael brought up our high density requirements and
The design standards.
the design standards. And in it, and I need to read it, but isn't there a section requiring higher quality materials on high density buildings?
There's language in that, in those standards that encourages essentially four-sided architecture. You have similar treatments, you know, especially architecture that's visible from a street. I think that may be what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring
Commissioner
to.
Olafson.
And so if that's what is in our standard or guidelines, I'm not seeing that throughout all of this community, and especially throughout Harriman as high density goes up. And so I think we as a planning commission, as a city, need to decide if that's in our guidelines, do we want to enforce it? Or do we not really care? Why is it in our guidelines if we're not really making high density be designed so all 4 sides look high quality?
And Michael, maybe in the next, before the next meeting, we can maybe look at what the design guidelines and standards are for this in regards to the 4 sides, because that might be something that we missed in regards to the back of the building and some of the materials. Let's just double check.
I just think about how this community in Harriman will look 30 years from now, and I think the less stucco, especially on our high-density units, the better long-term.
Thank you, Kobe. Do we have more slides, or was this the last one? I can't remember.
We kind of skipped around. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I just have one comment here. I like how it's reversed. I just think it'd be nice if you could sit on the brick that's kind of lower instead of having just two seats. Just make it a sitting area. That's just a suggestion, kind of like you have the middle circle, kind of the same, where it's just wider, where you can actually sit there. So it's more sitting area.
So pretty much similar to the center, but going around it.
Yeah.
Is what you're thinking.
Yeah, the treatment that's in the center moved to the outside is what he's, right? I'm thinking of it right.
Would you be okay if I did a board form concrete in there rather than the brick, and then I can have a proper seating deck? So the back of this, the height is board form, which will show the grooves within the timbers that you pour the concrete in, and then brick accents, and then we could create a ledger that would be sufficient for sitting. And that's essentially what we've done on that centerpiece.
So are you saying the brick look is actually a board form in the centerpiece?
The bottom part
Sorry,
is,
what's the question?
So you're talking about, because I'm very familiar with the board form concrete.
Yeah.
Are you saying the brick in the middle is going to be a board form?
No, the brick will be brick.
Okay, so the same concept as the
base-
middle, though.
Yeah, the base
Okay.
right there is board form. and
I
then you
think the
can pour-
contrast. I think the contrast looks nice
Okay,
here.
so we'll play with that, and I can get a seating ledger, and then we'll eliminate the benches.
yeah, I just like more sitting area.
I think Jackson wanted us to mention that there's no water feature, and he really wanted that water feature on the ends.
And he's not here to
Yeah,
let you know
so
that.
I'm just being his advocate for the waterfall.
No, I appreciate the input and work that they've put into it.
I want to talk about the brick color just one more time, because I don't know that we heard a good answer on the brick color.
I
And I
thought
wanna
we
get
said
Steve
bring
to
in.
You want to see bricks?
I want to see
Are
the
you
contrast
okay
of the
with-
colors.
With different colors on the buildings, or do you want to see them all be the same red brick?
I've grown up seeing this, and I'm very used
So
to it.
you
but
like
that's
the
just me.
contrasting kind of couple different colors?
I've seen it, so, and I like it, but that's just
I'm only hearing two
one.
people.
Yeah, I don't like, I think that we could come with another color that's a little, that can match a little bit better. I think that when
Which
we-
color is it, Heather?
The browns, I think, look good. I think that when we originally decided to do brick on this development, that we wanted to kind of match the town's, the city
commercial.
Wall and
building.
stuff,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think that we can still have different colored bricks, but I feel like that white one just is not.
So it's just these actual colors you don't love?
I don't like that white,
Okay.
the light color.
Okay,
But I think having
but having different colors is
different one
okay?
is fine, yeah.
Okay.
Might be a good idea to bring in some.
I'll bring them in next,
Yeah.
I'll bring them in sometime, before next meeting. Just for clarity's sake, I don't understand what you're saying. And
She's
I'll be the thick one here,
He just doesn't
not
like
you.
this white brick.
the middle one.
Contrast.
The beige-looking, whitish
The
one.
tan.
It just doesn't
School,
blend.
schoolhouse brick.
The lightest colored one is, it kind of,
So do we want, thank you for the clarification here, do we want all red tones?
no.
Nope, they're okay with different colors,
Yeah.
just not that color.
What color, if it's not red, would you suggest?
I think that
Because-
there's other brick colors that we could come up
Blue.
with that are different.
So you've seen all the
Would be
brick
a Y.
colors?
This isn't the
There's-
Y road, it's
We've
the
got
U road. So
two different
red.
colors of the red, which to me kind of start blending. You can see that on the corner. It's a challenge where those even kind of blend. And then you kind of go to everything that looks the same
Dark gray.
hue at some point.
I think, I mean, we don't have to decide right now if we like this or not. We could just say, hey, can we see the brick? The
Right.
color, maybe we'll like the lighter
Yeah.
tone.
And
Let's just see what it might look
And I'm
like.
okay to eliminate the tan if everybody feels that way.
I can't-
I'd
And
like
maybe-
to
But
see
there's a
it.
lot of tan going in right now that's very fresh and current.
Why don't you bring it in?
See, like that, like
Maybe
that-
let us see it.
Like
and
that view
how
right
they
there, I like
contrast.
it. Like
Yeah, I
that
do
view, I
too.
like that contrast.
Yeah, that actually looks better than what,
From
from the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, maybe you could put together on the site plan to show which buildings would be which colors?
Done.
Would
Yeah.
that be helpful, just so
Yeah,
you can see?
and
kind
I
of
will
how
have
it
the
would
brick
lay
sample.
And
out?
then actually see a sample.
And
Yes.
some bricks.
If you'll help me carry them in, I will have them.
I'll help you.
Andy's got it.
I'll give you a hand.
Okay, does the planning commission feel like we've addressed this adequately, or do we have more questions at this point?
I had
Any
one
more
quick
slides?
question that one of the residents brought up. So all the building fronts will be exactly the same, just different colors. Do we have an issue with that? And how many are there? Like, how many buildings are there?
Let's go back to the
There's
site
8.
plan.
8 plus the
There's 8,
4.
or I guess, yeah,
Or,
8 around the U and
Yeah,
then 4 down
and then
the
2 on each
lane.
side.
Okay. So does anyone feel like that's too much, or are they okay with the same?
I'm okay because the cutouts and everything, I think, and they're brick, and a lot of times when you deal with brick, you have a lot of cities and a lot of places where you can see a continuous brick, and I think it looks nice, but everyone's opinion can be heard.
Will they show, I guess, is there a slide that shows us which color of brick each building is?
Not yet.
They're going to get that
I'll
to
bring
us.
that
yeah,
next
also,
time.
he can do a site plan that shows which buildings will be which colors here.
But
so
you're
that
looking
will
at
help.
3 colors, right? Is what the sample shows. So
That's what we're showing, that's
Yeah.
what it shows right now.
I was just wondering, I don't know if 4 colors, maybe with 4 buildings? I don't know if
There's a lot of
that's,
buildings
Well,
there.
there's
know.
12.
Yeah.
It's
There's-
not.
There's 12 total buildings,
Yeah,
right?
I did one in Lehigh on Main Street where we did 4 very large towers all the same, and it looks good. I took some time in Daybreak, and they have done, I could just call it Yahtzee, which is kind of whatever they came up, and there's 2 tans and a white and a red, and we've tried to make this look retro, that it's been here for a long time with the brick and the stance of the buildings, and then bring in a little bit of the retro color brick with current bricks that match the brick that's adjacent to it with all of the city buildings. And so one of the charges that you gave us was to blend with the commercial portion of this and to have some changes in that. So I'm open to eliminating it. I worry about becoming too consolidated in color schemes where Mike has been encouraged to do separation of colors
On the mixed-use buildings, that's
and
true.
in the
they'll kind of be
mixed-use
broken up,
buildings.
yeah.
So we're trying to marry the overall look as if we were standing on the second story here looking out. So I will have that rendered, and then we can mix and match electronically before we put them on the building. And if we want to, I'll bring in 5 or 6 brick samples, and then we can determine where they go. I want to get it right, you guys. So
Yeah.
thank you.
no, thank you.
I mean, I just have one comment. The backs of the buildings, to be honest, they feel like a totally different building than the fronts, which it would be nice to have them feel like the same building like some elements
I think that was
pulled
a good
around
point
the
by Cody.
backside.
At the back? Yeah, that's the back of
Back
the
of the
same building.
condos.
Yeah. Even, you know, some
so you
brick
have 12
even some
buildings
brick
with this
elements
back?
going all the way up to the top.
Yeah, so I am in agreement that if there are 12 buildings that are very similar to this field, that we are missing something.
That they're all going to be white stucco on the backside, or gray or whatever color. I think they should pull some of
We need
those
some
brick
contrast.
elements up through the top
Up to these
and some of the
towers or
bump
something,
outs, or yeah.
And I think that would fall more in line with our high-density standards.
That you were mentioning earlier. Yep.
Question two I have, so on all these condo units where the sides are exposed, so the ones on the corners where there's like a wraparound with the road, I don't know, is this making sense what I'm describing?
The corners?
Do you want me to go back to the site plan
Yeah.
on this end, or where do you?
No, so maybe just go back to the whole site plan. So like the condo units on the ends of the Y,
Like down
see
here?
that corner?
face
Yeah,
commercial.
so
And
are,
the ones near the commercial as well, I think.
yeah,
The ones
are
on
all
these
of
ends
those, will those be wrapped with brick? So,
It has just the stucco in the middle.
so it's the same as those
same
little
end, they're all the same
courtyards? Yes. Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just feel very strongly about doing a higher quality material where you bring, where that part
It's more
comes out.
visual.
Yeah.
Where are you going to see those a lot
On
more?
the ends,
So that I can get this right and not waste everybody's time. You're talking about the center column that
Right
we've
there.
done in
Yeah,
stucco.
just,
When you
yeah.
reference higher quality material, could you be more specific?
Brick is hardy board.
Brick
higher
is,
quality?
we rendered that and everybody felt as if it was just a mass that was just
I think there
heavy.
has to be some
We
separation.
want a contrast, I think.
Yeah.
The contrast was asked for.
Yeah.
We went partway up on the building and then tried to just bring in some mix. The windows, I think, on the left side of the building, the bay that we've done there, I think broke up that wall. And then we added some window treatment and some coins.
What about a hardy board, Steve? I don't know much. This isn't my hardy board of some
Do
sort.
hardy. Sometimes hardy
do you
is
think?
viewed in small segments as being less than, but
I don't think that's that small. It's still 3 stories high.
Yeah, 2 out of the
if
3.
everybody likes hardy, we could,
I would like to just see, because I think it'll have a very similar feel to
like
it.
hardy?
It'll just, it's a little
I'll render
higher,
it.
it's viewed as a little higher quality and a little,
I can render that.
so.
Okay, thank you.
What is my
Colors? That type of contrast?
I'm okay with the color. The color doesn't bother me on the
Contrast? Okay.
side.
Okay.
The side color, the back definitely
Yeah, yeah,
needs
yeah.
some work.
Just
so.
specifically here, just a different quality of material.
I think it's
not
enough
necessarily
contrast
color.
for a side
Okay.
to break up the brick.
Okay.
So,
else.
I don't think there's anything else from my side, or from me, except for I would like, when we get to the point, have the CCRs come back. I think I would like to see those.
Yeah, and typically our primary concern with CCNRs is to ensure that there is an appropriate structure for maintaining common space. That's our primary interest generally as a city, why we want to see those.
We'll rely on you folks. We'll rely on you guys to help us with those as well. But yeah, it would be good to see those as well. Agree.
So if we're good at this point, we can actually have 3.2 looking to continue that. The public hearing is still open with a determined date of the next planning commission meeting. So we can look at a motion there, and then it looks like we can move on for a motion to continue as well on 3.3 as it coincides with this.
Can we do them together or separate?
Can we do them together?
You can make a motion together, can't you, Wendy? Separate? You want separate?
Probably
okay.
separate because the hearing's open on that one.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we continue item 3.2 for 2 weeks. Is that correct?
I'll second that.
A motion by Andrew and a second by Heather, and we'll call for a vote with Brody,
Yes.
Kobe,
Yes.
Andrea,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
and Andrew.
Yes.
And then we'll move on to 3.3 for a motion.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we continue item 3.3 for 2 weeks.
I'll second that.
A motion by Andrew and a second by Heather, and we'll call for the vote with Andrew,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Andrea,
Yes.
Kobe,
Yes.
and Brody.
Yes.
And then we'll move on to item 3.4, which is also on for a public hearing, which is a preliminary plat approval for a 2-lot subdivision, and we will turn to city staff.
Oh, I got it, okay. Two-lot subdivision, yes, okay. All right, so this is two-lot subdivision. This is just, where am I at? Over here. This property is almost 3 acres. They're just dividing it in half. It's fairly straightforward subdivision, zoned agricultural, half-acre lots. You can see where it is here existing, note the house on the side. They're just gonna cut it in half. They did have a neighborhood meeting. You have those minutes in your packet. None of the neighbors had any concerns with it. That's pretty straightforward. Again, this is on a public hearing, and then you can make a decision.
All right, we'll ask the applicant to come up and just state your name, and then if there's any additional information they would like to share.
You're on your own.
Hey, don't bite.
Well, I'm Diane Bodell.
And I'm guessing that's Charles?
We'll remember that.
Thank you.
And I forgot, what else did you ask?
Just if there's any additional information you'd like to share in regards to this.
No, we're just looking for approval.
All right. Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
I want to know where the goats are going. I drove by there today. I saw the goats. Are the goats going to be okay?
They'll be between us.
There you go. There you go. Thank you so much. And this is on for a public hearing, so we will open the public hearing at this time.
It was Chris's fault. He made you walk up.
And at this time, we will close the public hearing and turn to the Planning Commission.
All the city staff is left. I had a question for him, but, or planning staff anyway.
Staff?
Sorry, engineering, no, this is,
I can do my best.
no, you're fine, no. It's a zoning and, I'm gonna get in touch with my inner Adam right now about, future subdivisions of these lots. Is there gonna be an opportunity with the way this is zoned for future subdivision of these parcels and lots?
It would be very difficult.
I mean, they'd have to, with the homes and stuff, I get that, but if somebody comes in and wants to, again, I'm getting in touch with the inner Adam, right? So, I want to
just
remove the
around the
homes
cul-de-sacs,
and do
putting
some,
them
is there an opportunity with the way this is set up now?
Hold on, I'm gonna try and read that. It is zoned 8.5, obviously, so they couldn't go smaller than that unless you rezoned it, which you don't have to. I just want to see the size of that one lot, and I can't read it on there.
It's over an acre.
Lot 2's over an acre?
No, lot 1. I'm more worried about lot 1.
It's 1.86.
Yeah, lot 1 could probably easily subdivide again.
How many?
Lot
Additional lot?
2, probably not, just because of the frontage requirements.
Right.
Okay. So again, lot 1, maybe 2, you could get
But where the
that into
house is, I
lots.
don't see that.
No, I agree, but
They would have to
if they
tear
get rid of the
down the
home,
house.
down the road,
But yeah, lot 1 obviously could,
yeah.
I mean, that's half a cul-de-sac.
if that house was removed,
Yeah.
then they could.
Would be out of the ordinary.
Whether or not that's a concern, I just want to make sure that that was the case.
Yeah, like I said, I drove down there today. I think making the split
Yeah.
fits the neighborhood, fits that neighborhood really well. And I think
I
we
agree.
waved to each other, actually. He looked at me like I was a stranger in the neighborhood, which,
If you really want to live that close to your children, that's fine.
I think that's the ultimate compliment, that they want to live next to you.
That's
So,
true.
good job.
I'm looking at buying the lot across the street, to be honest, so I love it.
All right. Any other comments? Relevant? Planning Commission?
No comments. I'd like to make a motion to approve item 3.4, request for preliminary plat approval of 2-lot subdivision.
Second.
Thank you, Brody. Thank you, Lauren. We'll call for a vote with Brody,
Yes.
Kobe,
Yes.
Andrea,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
and Andrew.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We will now move on to item 3.5, which is a conditional use approval to construct a 5-tenant retail commercial building, including building elevations and the site plan for Lot 7 of Harriman Corner. And we will turn to the city staff.
All right, so this was also on our last meeting, maybe 2 meetings ago. This is on Harriman Corners. This is just north of the Mountain America and the KFC. So again, this is this building is proposed to have 5 tenants in it. You guys had a couple questions last time, so we continued it so they could make a couple changes. They have updated the landscaping plan to show all the required landscaping along the street. All the trees are in, so everything's good there. You would also ask for them to, so they updated the elevations because before it didn't quite make sense. So they've updated these to show that there will be stone and where the brick will be. Get a little zoom in there. Oh, and he's brought bricks for you, see?
All right.
Yeah, somebody brings us.
He brings bricks. I think the elevations and the landscaping were the 2 biggest concerns from last time. Just looking. Yeah. They also took the sign off the side. The sign will be a separate approval. It's not a sign.
Sounds good. I have no idea what it's going to be.
It's just what it is. They also sent some pictures, again, just so you can kind of see, this building will be very similar to these other buildings that they've already constructed.
All right.
With the brick and the stone kind of there.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
All right, we'll turn to the applicant at this time. If you want to just state your name and then share more information.
I'm Dave Murdoch, and I'm here representing Stephen Maycock and Jack Bickmore, who own the property and will be, they are the owners of the Subway. And so we're just here to answer any questions that you may have. I actually do have brick and stone.
I like it.
Nice. Way to one up Steve.
What we've done, if you take a look at those pictures that Brent pulled up a minute ago, we started with lot 6 with kind of a light stone and a red brick. When we went over to American Burger, it was more of a darker stone with a darker brick. This is a mixture in between, so if you want a little variety or some diversity, then that's what we're trying to do here. This is a lighter stone than the American Burger, but darker than the Lot 6, which is where the State Farm is. The brick is a reddish colored brick, but it's also a little bit lighter than the red brick on the State Farm. So we tried to make it look attractive. The building has been designed and will be very similar to the lots. The Lot 6 is State Farm. Lot 7 is just to the north of that, and that's the subject property. And then Lot 8 is where American Burger is. So there'll be the 3 buildings with a similar design.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
I just appreciate the visuals. I think that was my big concern last time, is just seeing the materials. And that they kind of were different, but still flowed with the other buildings that are currently there. So.
All right, if you want to take a seat, I appreciate it. If you want to take a seat at this time, and then I'll turn to the Planning Commission for any additional remarks or comments.
Like that hits our concern, right, Brody? That was our.
Yeah, that was my main concern. I think the layout is fine.
I think the only thing there was also an issue with the layout just on the walkway from the back parking lot to the front parking lot, issue 1. Maybe we can just touch on that briefly. Am I not seeing a sidewalk or anything from the front to the back with the parking?
Oh, because they're stacking on each side of the building for...
There's parking on both sides, but there's no entrance on the backside. That's my understanding.
Or there's no, yeah,
There's no entrance
sidewalk
for
to-
any of
yeah.
those.
On the backside.
Yeah. The other thing I was noticing too, and I don't know if that's this, okay, engineering question for you. I'm a traffic guy too, but the drive-throughs that you got, they're kind of opposing. If you think about it, as you're coming in, the traffic is going the wrong direction as they're gonna be conflicting. There are gonna be some crossovers, I guess, of those two.
Yeah, this one, because the ATM goes
Yeah.
through this way.
Right.
And then the dry cleaner goes through this way.
Is there any concern that way? Because it is, because as you're going down the middle of your parking lot, then you're gonna have to cross over. You're gonna have that crossover.
And we did suggest early on
You guys said moving
to
the ATM
move the ATM
into the middle
over
here?
with the applicant.
They could both go through that way. That didn't happen.
Was there a reason why it couldn't happen, I wonder? Because I like that idea,
Ask the applicant,
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to ask?
Yeah, let me ask.
Do you mind coming back up?
Come back up,
please?
yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Do you see the concern we're talking about, where you're gonna have traffic flowing in opposite directions and crossover? Is there a reason why we can't put that ATM on the other side, so you have both traffic heading, I guess, west in that area?
You know, I know that the architect has been working with Wells Fargo Bank, and that will be a Wells Fargo Bank ATM. And I know that this was their preference, that's all I know. Jack, do you know any more than that? As far as moving it over to the other side, that's an issue. I don't think that would be a problem, even though I'm still not sure that that should be a conflict in terms of the direction of the traffic. I think that your ATM will have limited traffic. I don't think it'll be all that busy.
Do you mind coming up to the mic and just stating your name as well, please?
My name's Jack Bickmore, and the Tide, and none of them are signed leases yet, but I talked to Tide today, but Tide is just a drop-off, and it is not a heavy traffic situation.
It's not like a drive-through restaurant.
So you're not a restaurant, you're not coming and going, you're getting, usually most of their traffic is between 7 in the morning and 9, and then at 5 to 7 type of thing, but it's just drop off and come and get it. So it's not like, and then I don't know anything about ATM. I've never used one in my entire life. I don't have any money to pull out to get any, so I have no idea how that works. But my guess is that ATM, there's not like lined up at ATMs either. So from my standpoint, I think it would work, but if we'll do whatever you ask us to do if it makes sense. But I don't think the two things that we have there. Now, if we had a restaurant on the end, I think our traffic would be totally different with a restaurant that's coming and going all the time. But with Tide, I don't think it has, there's not a lot of traffic that's gonna happen.
Okay, is there a preference from engineering on how we do this?
Yes, I would prefer both aisles to be going the same direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I sort of figured.
And even if both drive-throughs aren't utilized, you're going to have other users coming in and out of that parking lot. So.
Well, and long-term, you could have different tenants too, you know?
And I don't think that's a problem. I mean, I really don't.
Yeah.
This is just how it was designed, so I personally
Okay.
don't think it's a
That's
problem.
good, because personally, I like to make sure, and that's something I'll work with future as well, is make sure we have internal circulation. I know this is probably not a lot for that because it is so limited and you got to have your required parking, things like that with all the drive-throughs, but I hate having to go out onto a street just to get to the building next to it. If we have internal circulation and keep the flows, this is not conducive obviously to that, but something to consider for future. But I do agree with the whole safety concern. And maybe by doing that, you can then provide some type of, well, I guess you really can't have a sidewalk when you got drive-throughs on each end of the building. So that's the concern as well, is how do you get your clients from the backside of the building to the front if they're parking there
I think
safely?
that's gonna be employee
Most will
parking
be
is my
employees, and
guess.
all of them will have doors, I think, in the back, don't they? I mean, all spaces will have a back
And I'm okay
door.
if that's doors for your employees and things like that,
But
but
not
if-
for the-
but not for the patrons, right?
No, no.
So.
Yeah.
You're gonna have some patrons that are gonna be parking in the back as well, and so, again, with the conflicts. I think the two-way, having the traffic on those two drive-throughs in the same direction will help with the safety situation as well, for people that happen to have to walk around, figure out a way to get to the front.
Yeah, I don't think
so-
that, I personally, we can get that switched, I'm sure, with them. I'm not concerned with that at all.
So I'm a little curious just with this layout because I know we have, I guess the Jimmy John's has, you can enter on both sides of the building. to get into their restaurant. Is that what the idea or concept is for the one on the end as well?
No.
No, so it's really just the front entrance over here where they say there's gonna be a pergola and outdoor seating? But the back one is just gonna be
It's just
employee
for
use or
employees.
something like that?
Take the
Okay.
garbage out and the employees, yeah, so it
Okay.
it won't flow.
Can they use some, I know where the ATM machine is, can they put a sidewalk where the landscape was? Or
Well, I guess that was kind of
some
my
kind of
point too.
walkway?
If they can get that ATM into that middle island, then you can have a sidewalk around that outside for that as well.
The others have sidewalks.
Right.
Yeah,
Agreed.
that's the only one.
And do the
thing
other
I see.
buildings next to me have
Landscape
sidewalks, or is
zone.
that not a? They don't.
Looks like the one to the south there has something around the building. You can just
No.
see it right on the edge.
I can't think of a sidewalk on the
Nah, they
buildings
don't.
either.
So we missed it on
No.
those, huh?
But I don't think there's parking in the back
Yeah, there is.
like this,
There
is
is.
there?
There
So
is.
it's really just being used for employees?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you ever drive behind, like, was it the Roxbury, it's just employees.
Is this one, is this gonna
You're not
be,
gonna have high traffic. These aren't high traffic. Like Tide, you're not gonna have anybody parked
No,
out
there's
front.
no one parking there.
what is the road that goes right behind this? What is that road? Is that the one that goes over to Ace?
That's the
Yeah.
backbone.
Yes.
Yeah, so here's the Ace right here.
So that is gonna be a little bit busier road than the other roads.
Ace Hardware and
Yeah.
Lassa,
Yeah.
and, but they won't impact, inside lot 7.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if, because of that, and I agree with you, the back parking is typically not used as much, if that's gonna change how this back is being used or not. And I don't know if it's relevant, but, I mean, you really have probably the busiest road that goes through this commercial right there, out of them, so.
But they're still gonna park in front where the doors are. I mean,
Oh,
they'll-
yeah, absolutely.
And none of these Tide, like I said, Tide's only gonna have one at a time. I mean,
And
somewhere.
that's why we want Tide, to be honest with you, because we don't want a lot of parking, we want it for us. So we're trying to be
Yeah.
selective, and it's not done yet. Tide is, I mean, we're back and forth negotiating, but we want them for a purpose. Nothing's done until it's signed.
Well, and I guess the other point is, whatever businesses come in here, they're gonna have to deal with it. If they don't have room to accommodate their patrons, then they're not gonna succeed. So hopefully whoever's coming into this recognizes some of the limitations and, obviously the building to the south is a similar situation and apparently the type of clientele that's there is sufficient, so,
Okay.
yeah. Just some considerations, so.
Any other questions for the applicant? I guess was curious about the issue for landscaping. So they decided to just go with a berm, was I wrong in that?
Yes.
Yeah, they're doing 15 feet of landscaping in the front with a berm,
Okay,
and then the additional landscaping on it.
okay. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. That was all I had.
Architect spent considerable time on the phone with Heidi, is it
Yep.
Heidi? And made sure that we were compliant in every respect.
Nope, you're doing great. I just wanted to make sure I understood that it was a berm instead of the landscaping there.
Thank you.
Thank you. If the planning commission has no more questions, I'll look at them to potentially make a motion.
I'll go ahead and make a motion. If we could go back to the one, yeah, just perfect. I'd like to make a motion. We go ahead and approve item, which item is this?
3.5.
3.5, thank you, conditional use approval. Construct this 510 retail commercial building, including the building elevations and site plan with staff recommendations. And I'd like to add one more recommendation, that the north side drive-throughs, traffic, however you do that, flow in the same direction.
Maybe work with engineering.
And work with engineering on that. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Do you have a question, Michael?
Comment?
I'm just wondering, we haven't talked about the issue of the fence. Was that something that was on the commission's mind?
We did
the
discuss
corner?
that.
Yeah, they had just like
There was the one little corner that actually, is that what you're
We have a
talking
motion
about?
in a second. I just.
We do have a motion in a second if we want to,
I can amend the motion though, if, I'm happy to do that.
well, we can always call for a vote and redo a motion, I guess, at this point. I will call for a vote. Andrew?
I'm going to say no then, so we can amend
Okay.
the motion.
Heather?
No.
Lauren?
No.
Andrea?
No.
Kobe?
No.
Brody?
No.
And we'll allow,
Well, that was weird. Okay.
I'll go ahead and make a new motion.
Thank you.
All right. That we go ahead and approve item 3.5, as mentioned, with the staff recommendations, and that we require item 16 to work with engineering, but the recommendation would be to have the drive-throughs flow in the same direction on the north side of the building. And item 17, that they provide the required wall interface between the commercial and the residential area
Basically to complete that.
to complete that section of the wall, yeah,
And it's that
along
cor-
their frontage.
It's that corner that's, I don't know.
No man's land, yeah.
We
After
have
the
a motion
motion,
going right
after the
now,
motion.
and maybe you can talk to it. And the developer might be the one doing that, but the motion by Andrew, and if there's a second on
I'll
that.
second that.
And a second by Heather, and we'll call for a vote. Andrew?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
Kobe?
Yes.
And Brody?
Yes.
So that didn't pass. I just asked the applicant just work with city staff because I know there's a little itty bitty corner that needs to just be finished. And so that is why we added that into this. And we'll move on to item 3.6, which is a request for a conditional use approval for a home occupation in an agricultural zone for dog grooming. And we'll turn to city staff.
All right, so this is what we call a special home occupation or a home occupation in an agricultural zone, which allows them to use an accessory building on the property for the home occupation. A regular home occupation has to be done inside the home and can't be done out in a detached building. So this one is special and gets to come to you for approval. So it's conditional use for a dog grooming. Again, here's the ordinance. This allows them, like I said, to use an accessory building. It also allows them to have employees where traditional home occupation would not allow employees. So this is the property they have. It's a half an acre. Again, they want to just do a dog grooming in an outside building. Yeah, the ordinance has, again, requirements for, if they have employees, restrooms, can't change the character of the home. The applicant has indicated that it'll be basically one person at a time, dropping off a dog, picking up a dog. 5 to 8 a day, I think they said. Yeah, so that's what I have. Any questions for me?
Which outbuilding is that?
Yeah,
They're looking
that's what I was gonna ask.
to do this. Is it that one in the very corner?
I don't know, actually.
We'll ask the
Craig took
applicant
this
then.
application, and
All right.
I'm not sure.
Craig.
I know. What are you gonna do?
All right, then we'll turn to the applicant. Just state your name, and then it sounds like we may have a couple questions.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm Manuela Corletto, and I've been grooming since 2007, and I'm double certified at it back in 2007 and again in 2019, so recently, and I just keep that up because it's really important to me to continue my work and do it well. I also have a degree in political science with with UVU, but I just love dogs too much and animals, so I decided I'm just gonna do this. I do have a business already for dog grooming in Cottonwood Heights. It's a pet grooming salon and it has employees. And they don't much need me anymore because it's running just fine. But I just wanted to kind of do dog grooming from my home for myself because I enjoy it. And some of my neighbors have also been like, hey, can you groom my dog? And sure, come to the shop, but it's too far. So I figure in the neighborhood I can provide that service. But yeah, that's basically, I'm just hoping for an approval so I can just do that from home.
So is the building then that you would be doing that in that bottom right corner?
So-
Is that which,
It will look similar to that, but it's going to be a new, we're going to
you're
get
going
it.
to, okay,
Yeah, we're
construct
going
it
to
new?
construct it to the
Gotcha.
correct measurements
Okay.
and stuff, yeah. But, but it'll look similar to that.
Well, yeah, there's other requirements for outbuildings for the city to approve as well, so.
And there is no restroom in this, correct?
No, but it's just going to be self-employed, just me. I'm not going to have employees there
Okay.
at that location.
Well, I
so-
know that just states that you cannot have employees if there isn't a restroom
Right,
located on the
yeah,
site.
and I don't
Okay.
plan to, and I can just walk inside if I need to. But, yeah, so that would be easy enough for me.
Very good.
So.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, so my concern was changing the feel of the neighborhood, but you did mention that you have some neighbors that are interested
Yeah.
in this. So do your neighbors directly next to you, are they both aware that you're doing this?
Yeah, well, they both have dogs that they want me to groom.
Okay,
So
that sounds good.
So yes.
Okay, that sounds good. That answers my
Two of the
question.
ones, yeah.
Okay.
So.
Good.
Thank you.
No other questions? I'll let you take a seat.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And then I'll turn to the Planning Commission to either discuss or make a motion at this time.
I'll make a motion to approve 3.6 with staff recommendations.
I'll second that.
Motion by Heather, a second by Brody, and we'll call for a vote, starting with Andrew.
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
Kobe?
Yes.
And Brody.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Good luck, guys. We'll move on to item 3.7, which is a request for a subdivision amendment for a lot line adjustment between Anthem Corner, lots 1A and 1B. I'll turn to,
All right. Me. This is a plat amendment on a plat that we just approved, like a month ago. So you can see here, this is the original plat. This is the change that we're making, just literally sliding this line over like this, just barely. You can see this kind of shows previous, proposed, or has, yeah, lot line adjustment. This is not a public hearing because it's a plat amendment, so it does not require a public hearing. So
What's
Just-
the need for it, I guess?
what's the need for it?
Yeah.
The city is currently the property owner on these properties, and we are in the process of selling one of the lots. And it was just needed just the square footage and the size of the lot.
For
needed to be
parking
adjusted a
or,
little bit.
or building or something?
Just for the buyer who wanted to buy it, it just needed to be, whoops. Just needed to be a little bit bigger.
Okay.
A little bit bigger. So they want.
Yeah, they want 1B.
1B is the one that we're selling, yeah.
Yeah. Is that going to cause any issues with 1A for future,
Like tenants or?
you know, sell 1A down the road? Okay.
We're not concerned.
And I know there was a question before about the public access in the back, trying to,
Oh, yeah, limit it.
trying to remember the whole discussion there. I probably should have brought that up in the work meeting, but,
That's the access to the apartment.
because that's the apartments in the back there. There was I can't remember what the concern was now. I just
Just
remember
through
it was.
traffic, right?
yeah.
Was it just cut through traffic and trying to cut through the parking lot? So there was some,
Are we going to have a fence there?
And it was a fence, I think, is what we talked about, yeah.
Just a, is this a precast wall requirement?
It will
because
be
it's
when the
next to a
user comes in.
subdivision. Yeah.
When the user comes in, because we'll require a precast between residential.
The commercial, okay.
So that public access that's there now looks like it's being gobbled up in the lot 1B as well?
No, I mean, that access, there's still a public access easement, obviously, on this plat.
Okay.
So, I mean, that access isn't gonna go away.
That's not going to go away, but there will be a wall that's going to, or
But
where is
potentially,
the,
yeah, a wall that you could require along there.
along that? Okay. I think that was the concern, right? That we didn't want cut-through traffic from the park, from the apartment buildings going through that lot
Cutting through
as
the
well.
parking lot,
going
yeah.
through the
I
parking
do
lot.
remember talking about
Yeah, I
that.
think that's what it was.
I don't know, for me, I don't, I'm not really a fan of the 6-foot precast wall if there's no way for the pedestrian to get through. So, I mean, you could have a precast wall that's 6 feet with an opening so that people can walk into that space.
Is,
Well, then I guess that's a future, that's not part of the approval for
No,
today.
no,
That'll be a
I'm
part of the
just-
site,
I guess that's
you know,
more
approval of that
something
one.
we'll
But
bring
yeah,
up
that's a good,
Yeah, when the user comes in, that's when we'll look at it.
correct.
Maybe our economic development team.
But we
can
ought to
be on
make
top of
some
that.
type of requirement that, I don't know if we can make a requirement to,
I also look at it with the question mark is it conducive to have foot traffic through
Yeah,
it,
I guess it
depending on
depends
what
on the
goes in
tenant.
there
right.
as well. So, I mean, if we have a certain type of facilities, you don't want foot traffic going through it. So I guess it depends what goes there as well.
Yeah.
Can we say who we're selling it to? No, okay, we can't. Yes,
Costco.
I got a face.
It's what? Okay.
It's under contract.
What category does it fall in? Restaurant? Can you tell that? Medical? Okay.
So probably not a ton of traffic like
Yeah.
a restaurant would be
Yeah.
anyway. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I just look at it from, do we want traffic coming through that backside
Yeah.
for this?
Whether it's
Potential
pedestrian or
tenant, I guess is the
The
question.
kids, I mean, there are a ton of kids that cross that path,
kids
cross
that
that
walk
field,
across
that
that
come from the apartments to that.
Yeah,
Tons.
but I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah.
Having a bunch of kids walk through a parking lot every day,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Is it to go to the
Because we do have a sidewalk that goes all the way around there. It's a new thing they put in.
So again, maybe the whole discussion about pass-through traffic, that will be at a future date as well.
When they come in with
come
the,
in
uh,
with the.
This
the
is
use
just
and
for the lot
everything.
line
So
adjustment.
this is just lot line.
Adjusting this lot line.
So-
Yep.
All right, we're diving too far. All right, I got it.
trying to get our agendas across?
We still have a half hour.
If there's
presentation.
any other questions, if not, we can look for a motion on this item.
I move to approve item 3.7 with, are there 2 requirements from staff?
Second?
Motion by Andrea and a second by Lauren, and we'll call for a vote with Brody,
Yes.
Kobe,
Yes.
Andrea,
Yes.
Lauren,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
and Andrew.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. And then we'll move on to the one legislative item that we have, which is a discussion of a proposed community development zone. And we'll turn to city staff, and then I think we'll go to the applicant.
Okay, thank you. I have informed our presenter that we were looking for about 30 minutes of presentation and conversation tonight on this topic. Would the commission like to take a short break before we enter into that presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay.
We'll adjourn for a short break and then meet back in, that's
soon
correct,
as
right?
possible.
And we need to make a motion for that, or do we?
We can stay here and have the presentation here, if that's,
Oh, no, I'm okay with coming back here, but I want the short break.
okay. That's up to you.
So do we have to motion to?
Do we have to make a motion for a short break? I can't.
Wendy's shaking her
Yeah,
head, yes.
yeah, so we need a motion.
Motion for a break?
I second.
And a second, all in favor?
Aye.
And we'll be back in 5 minutes.
That was real official. That was real official.
All right, we are ready. And so the last item on the agenda, which is item 4.1, which is discussion of a proposed community development zone. Michael, is there anything you want to share, or should we go straight to, or I guess, do you mind just stating your name?
Absolutely, I'd love to do that for you. In fact, I'll tell you what, can we get the presentation to?
We need to switch to his presentation.
The HDMI on the. There we go. Thank you for the opportunity to be in front of you again this evening. My name's Mike Hathorn. I am the principal with Community One, which is a community design and planning firm.
You also won an award today.
That's what I understand.
For a project, yeah, it was we were at the luncheon for APA Utah, and you were on the project for the
Sandy Stadium Village Plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the tip of the cap. Appreciate it.
That's right.
So I guess quickly in terms of a quick review. Last time we were together, we had a discussion about why we're having this discussion about zoning. And the crux of that discussion revolved around the idea that zoning is DNA. And if you want certain things in terms of your development patterns, the DNA has to allow for it. If it doesn't allow for it, it's not going to happen. That's the bottom line. And I shared with you a few slides to kind of give a representation of the relationship of DNA to placemaking. And I used an example of Killeen, Texas. This is a street view of Killeen, Texas, and then compared it to a street view of a neighborhood in Prospect, Kentucky. And we diverged a little bit and talked about landscaping and such, and clearly there are some things that don't make it very fair in terms of looking at this and then looking at this. But there are specific aspects between the two that are important to understand as it pertains to the delivery of the different development patterns. And I want to take that a little bit further for you by introducing the idea that part of what zoning responsibility to regulate is the principles of the relationships of things, the context, and the form. So I've got this photo from the Yale Crest neighborhood in Salt Lake City. And when you look at it piece by piece, because this is what we have to understand zoning is doing, is it's regulating the relationship between the publicly owned area, your right of way from back of sidewalk to back of sidewalk. And it can deal with everything from how wide your tree lawns are to the widths of your travel lanes in the street. There is some overlap, I'll admit, with your engineering standards, but this does and often can be regulated by zoning itself. Next is understanding the relationship between the privately owned communal areas along a street, the yards, and their relationship to the publicly owned areas. Those are other aspects in terms of measuring the relationships, the context and form. And then lastly, when you get to the private facades of the buildings, what is the relationship as you move from private to semi-private to public? Those are all things that, unless specifically addressed, they will happen haphazardly, and what you end up with is what you saw in that photo of Killeen, Texas. because the detail in terms of those relationships was not covered appropriately. Here's a great example up in Ogden on 25th Street. And I think it's also important to note as it pertains to this is to keep in mind that one of the aspects relative to context is the difference between whether you are designing towards the automobile or to the human being. The automobile will require different things than the human being does and vice versa. So it's not to say the automobile is bad, the human being is good. It's just understanding that if you're designing to one, it does impact the other, and you just have to accept those relationships. So looking at this particular example in Ogden on 25th Street, you see a very tight relationship in terms of public, private, building facades, their relationship to the street, and things work extremely well. And
I like the corners. The corners look really nice.
corners are fantastic. And what's important to note about this is that this is all pre-zoning. These buildings were built before zoning was actually a thing. And this is just what you did in order to make things work. Another example, and this is more speaking to the issue of whether you're looking at things from auto scale as opposed to human scale. This is 114th South in South Jordan. This is also 114th South in South Jordan. It's the same facility. It's a major arterial. But there are some very distinct differences between the two. And those differences were emitted based on the DNA. One is more autocentric, and so what you have are, your wonderful cement walls, your sound walls on both sides, basically creating a car canal. And then, in contrast to that, same facility, but you have buildings that are actually fronting that major arterial. Now they're set back in order to accommodate the fact that it is still a major arterial. But nonetheless, the buildings themselves are actually engaging the street as opposed to the contrast situation. The bottom line, and this was one of the points that we touched upon the last time, is to understand that in the end, in terms of the development pattern, it's a function of whether you're ultimately delivering commodity or community. Community is much more responsible and much more resilient. Commodity is a system that conventional zoning provides for us today. That is the status quo default, is the delivery of commodity. And, they each have their pros and cons, but I think what ultimately we want to consider is the idea that there should be choice. And in that choice, you need to have the tools within the city that will actually provide for choice to exist.
Question with that last picture,
Yes.
and it's just a curiosity question. What is the difference in, I guess, units per acre between the two? Because I noticed the one on the right looks like it has more green space. It's a little different setup. The one on the left obviously is just rows. So I'm curious, just like
That's a great question, and I wish I had the number. I can tell you that in general, the one on the left is actually less dense than the one on the right. It would be fantastic to have those numbers, though. What is not, I guess, is what you're not seeing on the right is the degree of intensity that actually exists within that development pattern. You have, we saw it in some of the images that I showed last time. You've got 3- and 4-story buildings in here. You have non-residential uses in here. You have homes on much smaller lots than you're seeing on the left side. But in terms of the two environments, the one on the left is very homogeneous in terms of the development pattern and the size of lots and the size of homes, in contrast to what you're seeing on the right. But I would say, in general, the difference between the two from a density standpoint is that the one on the right is actually, the density is higher. Specifically, what we're going to talk about is the how tonight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the Community Development Code, which is a template code, meaning that it's a higher starting point in delivering a set of zoning code that will allow for the emission of complete neighborhoods and centers without having to start from scratch. In that is the requirement that the code is calibrated. Because what you don't want is, and we talked about this a little bit the last time, there needs to be a relationship between the vision and mission of a community and what you actually allow to be emitted by your zoning code. That's where the calibration comes in, because the objectives and goals of Harriman are going to be different than the objectives and goals of Draper, as an example. So in order to have a code like this work appropriately within your municipality, it does require calibration. Now, one of the things that I promised, and I'm hoping that Michael delivered on this, was that you would receive a guidebook. Did all of you receive that guidebook? And you had a chance to hopefully go through it a little bit and preview it. So that guidebook will hopefully, in fact, if you have the ability to pull it up in front of you, it will act, there we go. It's going to act as a foundational background for what it is that we're talking about. And hopefully you have some questions for me. Hopefully there are some things in there that you saw that you wanna understand better, and please feel free to ask those questions as they arrive. This particular template code is something that I've spent 8 years of my life working on and trying to perfect. I can't necessarily say that it's perfect. It certainly is going to have things that need to be fixed, but it is an absolutely fantastic tool for like I said, the purpose of delivering complete neighborhoods and centers. There is a process that the code addresses, and it's important to understand that this is a very nuanced code in that you're not handling everything all at the same time. It actually requires multiple approvals, which are identified here. And the reason for that is that the decision-making associated with this code is to address larger parcels of property, the size of which will deliver neighborhoods. And in that process, we want to ensure that we're not making decisions ahead of when decisions need to be made. And that's for the benefit of the municipality as well as the developer. Decisions that are made in one step will actually inform decisions that are to come. There's 4 steps that are identified here. The first is a development area plan. Next is a community plan, a block plan, and then lot plans. And I will give you examples of that as we go through this. I want to also give you a little bit of an understanding of the foundation on which this code is built. There are 4 main organizing principles associated with this code. The first is the transect. The transect is actually a science term from ecology that deals with the relationships in nature between ecosystems. Maybe you remember some of this from an ecology class that you took at some point. Those principles of a transect can also be applied to the human habitat. And the way in which it's addressed in terms of the human habitat is to look at the range going from rural to urban. And what's important to understand about that, as it also compares back to natural law, is that things that are applicable and are necessary and appropriate in a rural setting are not appropriate in an urban setting, and vice versa. So the transect is actually part of the system of governance that the code works from in terms of dealing with those issues of context. And this is really a point as it pertains to dealing with the carrying capacity of the land itself. Land is a finite resource. We often don't treat it as such, but it is a finite resource. And so there's an understanding that we should try and work towards dealing with the environmental, social, and economic aspects that are associated with that land. The transect is very sensitive to dealing with that issue. And so that's why it carries the weight that it does inside the code itself. The next is the idea of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is a principle that is tied to decision making. And the way that it's defined, and this is, what you see here is the Webster's definition of it, is that it's dealing with the vertical nature of who makes decisions. And the principle is that decisions should be made by those that are closest to the actual impact of the decision. Decision making is pushed down. What the code does is it actually expands that and takes into account when decisions are made. Because it's not just who's making the decision. And I'll show you how this works within the code with another example. But if you're making decisions at the wrong time, then you're bound to make mistakes. And the way that conventional zoning works today is it forces the front loading of decisions to be made in the present. And not all decisions really need to be made in the present. But the system it demands it. You've been dealing with that principle all evening in terms of the decisions that you're made relative to such things as brick colors. It's not necessarily a decision that has to happen right now, but the system is kind of pulling at you to sink your teeth into it and make the decision because the issue is in front of you today. Subsidiarity allows, if properly allocated through the system, it will allow within a given step to compartmentalize the decision makings that you should be looking at, knowing that you're going to make later decisions within another set of requirements that are going to come forward. This code is also built on the foundation of the Plat of Zion. The reason for that is that the crux of this code, in terms of where it came from, looked at and studied early Mormon community building to look at the metrics associated with how planning was done and how that planning then led to design. And you'll see the impacts of that relative to what you see on the right. What you see on the right, these are a list of issues that are I guess, that tie directly to what the Plat of Zion dealt with and what the code actually addresses also, based on the analysis that was done to loop those two in together. And then lastly is this idea of a plan key. You're going to see this on the example exhibits that I'll show you with the different planning steps. The reason this is an organizing principle is because in the application of it, when you see, if you were to see a submittal to come forward, simply by looking at the planning key, you're going to be able to know what type of community you're looking at, what sort of blocks are associated with that community type that you're looking at, and the applicable lots. So I like to refer to this, and this will date me, but I like to refer to this as the granimal piece of the zoning process. In that what you're doing is you're matching elephant to elephant or lion to lion. You don't wear your lion shirt with your elephant pants. That's not how it works. So this is addressing that in terms of you knowing up front in the bottom planning key there that the community plan that you're looking at is dealing with an urban neighborhood, which has 3 block types associated with it and 6 lot types that are associated with it. And it gets very particular based on which step you're in. So you'll see that demonstrated. So as we noted, as I noted coming into that, what you're going to see are different colored slides that tie to this chart. The process is identified down the left side, with the exception of the district area or the development area plan that I'll show you. And then the components that are in the middle and on the right are the aspects that are associated with those planning steps and where they actually hit. So that you know that in terms of looking at the code comprehensively, you will, as you become familiar with it, you will know what's coming, when it's coming, who's making the decision, what the developer is making decisions in regards to in terms of the submittal that they're making, and the parameters under which the developer is allowed to work from. So in terms of the issue of subsidiarity, this is how the system actually applies to that matrix that I showed you earlier. So on the left side, vertical, are who is making decisions. And it's very important to understand this because there are very specific issues that are tied to whether a decision is legislative or administrative. And so that's something that needs to be tracked in this process. On the horizontal axis, we're dealing with when the decisions are made based on the applicable step that we're dealing with in the middle. And so inside those green boxes, I'm at least attempting to show that over time, certain decisions are made that are prefaced to decisions that are then being made later. And hopefully that's conveying itself properly.
So Michael, with
Yes.
this image, for instance, because I notice you have under micro or developer, the design implementation product style materials. Does that, is it typically still looking at a design guideline established by the city that they have to fall within, or are you giving a lot of flexibility for them to develop how and what they want in that time?
That's a fantastic question. And I'll say ultimately it's going to depend upon what the vision of the city is, because it can actually work either way. The way the code is written in its template form is it provides parameters within the 4 planning steps for the developer to make decisions relative to how design is regulated. The implementation comes after all the approvals are made. So but the way in which the developer is making decisions, while granting a degree of flexibility, it's putting parameters under which those decisions are made, based on the type of community that's intended to be emitted. Because again, if we're looking at doing something that's more rural, then there's a context there that needs to be protected and parameters set so that the decisions that come forward to you relative to these different submittal steps are within the context of the delivery of the community type. So it's not a carte blanche system. You're not providing ultimate flexibility to a developer by any stretch. But there is latitude for the developer to make decisions relative to the context of what it is that they're delivering. What this is referring to more specifically is when does implementation actually occur? You know, you dealt with the issue of making decisions relative to how Edge Homes is going to deal with design aspects of the condos and the townhomes that you saw. Implementation is
So
going to
you're
come after
referencing,
that.
like, you're
So it's-
referencing the design standards or guidelines so much as that's what's guiding this developer with what they can do, because, or are you leaning more towards the ordinances that are in place, or what are guiding the developer with design implementations, product style, materials? I mean, because I guess I'm wondering with this overlay zone, or whatever we want to define it as, the CDC zone, or however it will be, but is it have its own group of design guidelines thrown to this zone, such as the town center, or is it's the ordinances within the city is the guidelines that are thrown into that? I mean, I'm wondering if it has its own that are tied to it, because now you have this huge zone,
For each
here's where it needs to
product
fall
type?
in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of what I was
So I'm wondering
wondering.
if there's something that is if this zone, if it's put in this zone, you automatically have these design guidelines. Now, it lets you have some flexibility with product style materials based on the products you put in these different areas and the densities and everything else, but you have a different set of design guidelines once you decide to have this zone.
Okay, let me elaborate. I believe I understand more clearly what it is that you're asking. This code is meant to be a universal code. You're not going outside of this code to deal with other aspects, whether it's signage, whether it's landscaping, whether it's, architectural styles. The code is meant to be universal in its platform, specifically because what you're delivering is something different. This is about delivering human scale neighborhoods, not autocentric. And so it has to deal with things in terms of that human scale. Now, if you think back to the image that I showed you of the Yalecrest neighborhood and the relationships that exist that you're trying to regulate in terms of your public right-of-ways, your semi-private yards that are back of sidewalk, and then the building facades, the code is actually addressing those things in terms of its form. But I think what's important to understand is that you're making those decisions incrementally relative to the planning steps so that they build upon each other. So in terms of establishing the form that the buildings take, you don't necessarily need to know what the materials are until you get to aspects of what the building actually is.
So what I'm getting is, like in Town Center, we wouldn't have made a lot of these design guidelines 10 years ago that were set in place 10 years ago wouldn't have been made 10 years ago. They would have been put more in place right now, because that's a step in the future that is coming to us, because designs will change.
Using the Harriman Town Center, and I'm pretty familiar with everything associated with the Harriman Town Center from other work that I've done in conjunction with Michael. The pieces were done basically based on that idea that everything has to be decided today. And so there were decisions made that simply didn't allow you to molt and determine, now you've got issues today that were very different from the time that those documents were set. So whereas this anticipates that and allows time to play into the decisions, but it sets the parameters under which all of those decisions are going to be made. So that it's not a free-for-all. You can't have a free-for-all.
Yeah, because, and I guess I'm trying to understand it, because we keep talking about how it dictates or changes based on what the now is.
Yes.
Now, I look at that and they built well, a lot of you are familiar with Terramere. That became what it was because now warranted that, and it's not the best product. So my fear is if we're dictating everything with what now does it cause it to be an inferior product if the economy and the time allows that?
And I would answer no.
And see, that's what I'm trying to understand, because I do believe, and I do like the design guidelines for a lot of what was in place for the Harriman Town Center. And granted, it took a lot of work for us to go back to the developer and say, no, you're trying to cut corners on it. Here's the guidelines. You need to add more to it. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to understand with this zone, because it almost feels like it's indirectly its own MDA almost.
No, it is absolutely not. In fact, you're still gonna need an MDA, because you're talking about land quantities that are exceedingly large. I mean, you're talking, to do a complete residential neighborhood, you're talking at the minimum 40 acres. And more realistically, to have the neighborhood be what it frankly needs to be, you're probably doubling that. And so you still have to deal with the aspects of an MDA in terms of the delivery of development and what that relationship means between you as the city and the developer. So you're not bypassing the need for an MDA, and this is simply providing a more comprehensive platform for dealing with the aspects associated with zoning that you don't have available right now.
So do we still fall back to, our multifamily ordinances, guidelines for each product type?
Using this, you would not.
Okay.
You absolutely would not. That would be outside of this, because this is intended to be a uniform code that addresses all of those issues. It's going to address them differently, and it's in essence going to phase those issues, but it's going to provide you much better latitude to dealing with the issues incrementally, as opposed to dealing with it all at once without being able to anticipate what's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years.
And I guess that's the part I'm trying to understand, is how it does that part. That's the part I'm missing with what we're talking about right now.
I'll show you.
Well, let's hear it then.
Show you. So the first step is to deal with the aspects of the land in its totality. And I shared the example with you last time of my experience of having to work with 3,000 acres and figure out how do you break that down. And what we determined is that the first thing that you have to do is you have to determine the allocation of the whole into their individual neighborhoods based on an establishment of community types. So what you're seeing here on the right is roughly about 500 acres. And the purple areas are the community types or the neighborhoods. So those are getting marked out. You're also dealing with the backbone infrastructure associated with delivery of development. When you're dealing with large pieces of ground, you don't want to just grant entitlements without knowing whether they can be delivered. So you're dealing with the aspect of the utility infrastructure. You're dealing with the accessibility of the property itself in terms of the macro level transportation that's needed to connect these neighborhoods. One of the tools that you need to have available relative to the development area plan are community types. Community types, and this is where the Plat of Zion comes in terms of the analysis that was done to study, learn, and understand what a community type was on a transect scale from rural to urban. And so what the code does is it actually establishes these 9, and it could certainly be expanded, but in the template code, you're looking at 9 different community types that run the gambit from rural agrarian community types. So larger lots, larger homes, far less intense, because there is in certain instances with the land as a whole and having a sensitivity to it, there is the need to protect or preserve. And so if you're going to have areas that you're protecting or preserving, you need to limit the impact, which is where the agrarian community types come in. Then you have the suburban or neighborhood community types that are identified. And then the centers, which are the urban community types. They all have their own set of metrics associated with how you emit each of these different types of communities. And those metrics are tied to the block types and the lot types that are associated with the community types, which are the later steps that you're dealing with. So here's a representation in terms of that tie between the transect and the community types. The relationship between the more rural settings and having to address those relationships in terms of transitioning from nature to human being. Your neighborhoods, which then are in essence the buffer from a community type or neighborhood standpoint between rural and your urban centers, so that there's a smooth relationship between those. We're gonna look at an urban neighborhood as an example here in terms of how it would be regulated. So within a development area plan, going back to that graphic, for discussion purposes, the northeast purple area would be considered an urban neighborhood. It's been identified, labeled within this development area plan as an urban neighborhood. So then we're going to show the community plan, which takes that urban neighborhood, which at first is just a great big piece, and it's going to break it down, and it's going to identify the allocation of the allowable block types within that urban neighborhood. And the metrics associated with those block types you'll see on the left. You have 3 block types available in different quantities. You see on the right the application of those block types. Each block type is represented by a different shade of gray. The darker the gray, the more intense the block type. And then taking a step further, you see the total acreage associated with that particular neighborhood. So gross acreage is over 260 acres for this one. That needs to be broken down. The block type percentages that you see underneath tie back to the percentages allow to determine whether they're in compliance with their plan. Now, at this point, you don't know what's going on inside of those blocks because the community plan doesn't address that yet. But what you do know, and you know this actually because the code addresses it, before an urban neighborhood comes in front of you, you know what its DNA is. You know what its DNA is in terms of how intense it is and what the open space, and we'll get to those issues too, what the open space is that's associated with it. Because again, we're trying to deal with the context of rural to urban. So then we go to the block type, and there's this understanding that with the block type, you're actually within the parameters of the community plan, you're actually regulating block sizes, and understanding that block size has a correlation to what it can emit. Here are some examples going from agrarian blocks to very urban blocks. What what can actually be emitted from the code. When you look at it more specifically, taking, in this particular example, a block type 4, and you subdivide that block into its associative lot types, and then determine, each block type has requirements that are associated with the allocation of block types. So again, you can't push the limits of the more intense block types, because you have requirements to deliver lower block types. Because part of what you ultimately want to deliver in terms of a neighborhood, you want to at least provide the opportunity for choice as it pertains to a diverse range of housing.
Do you have percentage of green space per density type?
Yes, the community type will actually identify open space requirements, and it does that in percentage as you're used to, but I'll show you, this has a twist to it. And it's a very useful twist because it qualifies the open space. What you're used to dealing on a quantity basis is a developer coming in and saying, I've got to deliver you X% of open space, and oh, by the way, a certain percentage of that is going towards dealing with my stormwater retention. And it's gonna house electric utility boxes. Well, that's problematic if the objective is to provide space that is actually qualified and is delivering something to you of substance. So this is about having a quality play rather than a quantity play, albeit you're giving parameters for the delivery in terms of an amount. I'll demonstrate that for you. So as you go from a block plan which subdivides the block, and as part of that process is going to inevitably deliver a plat, you need to then know what's, the next stage is to deal with the lot itself. What's going on the lot? And so what we're going to do in this example is we're going to isolate to a lot type 5. The middle chart gives you the parameters associated with a lot type 5. The lot type 5 will emit buildings based on these requirements. So you're dealing with what you're used to dealing with on larger parcels. You're dealing with it on a more intimate basis, because what you want is the opportunity to potentially deliver different product next door to each other, as opposed to having an entire parcel of townhomes. So we have the requirements. We tie those requirements to a particular lot. So we've identified a lot, and on that particular lot, it's intended to deliver a townhome. This is the metrics that you're seeing in front of you are demonstrating its compliance with what you saw 2 slides prior, in terms of dealing with setbacks, in terms of dealing with lot coverage, in terms of dealing with the massing. How big is the building? Lot type 5 allows you to go to 3.5 stories. This one is going to 3 stories. So it's what you're seeing in front of you is helping you to say, yep, based on the lot type, the building type that they're proposing actually marries, they connect. You've got your Granimal features coming into play, tying the two together, and you have that delivery in terms of process.
So and I think I'm understanding the concept a little bit, and with layers, with the different block types, with how it's really being structured. And tell me if I'm off base or if I'm getting closer, I guess. So we look at a layer 1 for the protected green space that we want, and with I guess it depends on certain areas as well, but protected green space, which we lay that down. And then all of a sudden, we start to base or break down into these blocks around that area. And those block types can vary. For instance, the one you showed us was townhomes. But the block spaces are a little bit smaller, which gives it more of a mixed type of development, where there's different units, different sizes, different areas. And then with locations of these other amenities and walkable areas where you want each one of these blocks to be within certain distances of these walkable areas, whether it's a park, a church, whatever, or school, you start to structure it around that. And then once you structure that around that, you look at a lot of the transit and how we're going out with roadways, everything else that'll be structured through these blocks to keep the flow consistent. So we're looking at, for your word, the DNA.
Yeah.
To structure it properly with how everything is, but we do it in smaller increments with blocks. And when we do it like that, we're able to provide a more diverse product type. Instead of getting stuck towards like, this is the density in this zone, we want different types, and they're like, well, we're gonna shove what the density is in there. And so we don't have as much options. So more or less you're taking that development and you're breaking it up in 4 or 5 different blocks and saying, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. Now that's what you get to do. And it diversifies that a little bit. Is that in essence? I know I'm not 100%. You gave us way too much information for me to get it 100%, but is that in essence where we're going a little bit?
No, yes, absolutely. You're getting the concept, which is extremely important. And I liked that you're able to actually differentiate between the system you work under now and what this is doing. Because, you know, it's very important to understand that aspect of it, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense to do anything different.
Then I have to ask the next question.
Okay.
How do we protect ourselves with MDAs and this type of zone? Let's say we choose to have a zone like this. Well, typically what happens is all of a sudden there's an MDA that they have more expensive lawyers than any of us have.
Right.
And they write it really well, and they go back and forth some. And in the past, and we've gotten much better with it over the time, from the original MDAs that are still in place to the ones that we see now. But it always seems like the MDA sort of supersedes half of what we were trying to accomplish in ordinances and other protections sometimes. And sometimes it's hindsight's 20/20, and then we put an ordinance in place after they've gotten their MDA.
Well, let me ask you a rhetorical question.
I don't have to answer this.
Absolutely. Why does it operate that way? I mean, you have to look at the system that you're working with now, and ask yourself why is the MDA oftentimes superseding what it is that you are intending to do?
That's a great way to put it.
And I think Michael could probably speak to it a lot more specifically, but in terms of my experience, it's typically because your conventional zoning oftentimes is silent on so many things. And so it forces, in order to deal with the issue, both to protect you guys and for the developer to protect themselves, you're each negotiating for the things that frankly aren't being covered. And in that negotiation, you are trying to do it within the context of anticipating over the course of the absorption of the project that's in front of you. And sometimes it's a very short time frame. If you can operate from a real estate standpoint, if you can operate within a single real estate cycle, the amount of risk in terms of doing a lot of the stuff that we're talking about goes out the window. But soon as you cross a line and you're going into multiple real estate cycles, you don't know what the next cycle is going to give you. You just don't. We're bad at guessing. And let me add something that I'd like Michael to comment on. If you're working within a system like this, the negotiation relative to your MDA will be completely different. You're not going to be negotiating on the same things because the code itself is actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting of dealing with aspects that the MDA you're having to argue, debate, and negotiate for.
Yeah, that's been my thinking, is that this tool provides a lot more structure and predictability than the tools that we currently have in our existing zone. And just as you were talking about how the MDA is really superseding our zoning tools, and since I've been here, the zoning code, whenever we're dealing with a project within an MDA, has very little influence.
Irrelevant?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it
really
right.
is.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I'll say it.
Yeah. So I see this as giving a lot more structure
No-
to that conversation. Yeah.
No, because obviously the economy changing up and down affects a lot of the decisions that individuals make. Now, and this is where my mind's going, and may be off, but hypothetically, when we go to a block system and we have different unit types, the economy fluctuating really just means the developer is going to focus on certain block types first. Is that potentially true or no?
No.
Because if they're having to where the real estate prices are dropping drastically or different things are occurring, it may change their strategy on how
We
they
see
do
that
it or
happening
no?
now. We see developments approved, and they're not building some of the single-family homes. They're not.
Right.
They're building the.
Which is why people are leaving our city, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, why is that happening? I mean, to be rhetorical again, why is that happening?
They make the most money out of it.
What is it that was approved that is now out of line with what the market is saying can be done? The bandwidth on use-based zoning is so narrow that as soon as there's a fluctuation, I mean.
Well, one of the things that, at least with some of our previous MDAs, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, that has affected us negatively, is we have given them units in a space, not where or different blocks or different zones, so they can cluster higher units in certain areas sometimes. And then it causes some problems with the overall project having the overall concept or idea of what we wanted.
Yeah, they're moving right from a bubble plan to a subdivision plat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're missing kind of the maturing of the vision between the bubble plan and when they're platting. Yeah, and so we're not really guiding that.
Yeah,
And I guess agreements aren't guiding
and
that.
when they're platting, they're platting at a much larger quantity oftentimes. You know, those bubbles are fairly large, and everything inside of that bubble is in essence the same density. So the ability to diversify, in most cases, I won't say all because I don't know the specifics of the zoning that they're working with, but in most cases, that bubble, it's one use, and even if it's a residential use, you're limited to one lot size, which is going to emit one product, and it's going to emit one demographic.
And to some extent, some of the more recent developments, we've actually put in blocks to some detail, like Teton Ranch, and then as we go over, they're all blocks, but they're a lot bigger, and they're not exactly the concept of what you're implying.
Yeah.
But we have tried to block them off a little bit, to where it's like, okay, here's what you can build in here without as much detail as you are. And you can call it zoning, you can call it how you want, but we got very specific on these size lots because we had to.
Yeah.
Because
I guess the question
they're
is,
finding their loopholes.
what was the process to get them there? And was it something that you were able to point to and say, you need to do this for these reasons? Or did it require a lot of negotiation between city and
I
developer?
think that's accurate.
To get them to budge?
City, developer, plus community.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and I see with this concept, the MDAs that are going to be happening, there's going to be a lot of negotiation because a lot of the developers are going to want to go with a higher density community type, right, than what the city may want as well. And so you've got to get that worked out. I'm assuming that's what's happening with your MDAs now in this situation is you're going to be
No,
working
actually,
through.
no. Reason being is because, again, going back to that principle of having a carrying capacity, you can't simply push for the more intense neighborhoods and centers just because you want it, because those actually get qualified within the context of the development area plan. There are issues, for example, of adjacencies that the code actually helps to protect. If you are putting a community type up against an existing neighborhood, your starting point is that your neighborhood needs to be like for like as you touch that edge, so that you are not building in a conflict between what was actually there first. So there are nuances this that will actually determine whether or not you get to use the more intense neighborhoods or centers. And that's part of the aspect of doing the development area plan first that then follows with the other steps.
Yeah, I like the layers that it brings in, yeah.
So
Okay, again, the development area plan then is where the crux of the MDA will then come into play. Is that
yeah,
right?
you'll be.
So
as-
again,
as
they're going
the-
to want a more high dense, because yeah, you may have those buffers then, but they may say, you've got this large area, I want this density overall.
Well,
And so, and then,
I'll give you a working example. The 3,000 acre property that I worked on, we broke it down into community, well, I could actually show you. I wasn't planning to because I thought I was probably getting into the weeds too much, which I like to do because I geek out on this, and I pulled back because I was worried about you not being as excited as I get. But basically, we had 3,000 acres. We had an entitlement of, let me see if my memory serves me correctly, 16,000 equivalent residential units, which was the currency for development. Those 16,000 units we had to figure out how to disperse them, because we had 3,000 acres of a blank slate. And so the way to do that was to say, well, under this system, you take the 3,000 acres and you start to put a structure to it in terms of understanding the impacts of regional transportation, sensitive lands. And those then help to set boundaries where the community types actually laid out. And then an allocation from the big bucket at the level of the property as a whole was then assigned to
okay, so
the
you got to
community
tie your
types.
community type to the ability for your infrastructure and whatnot to accommodate.
Exactly.
And so that's got to be tied into
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's part of the negotiation as it pertains to the property as a whole.
Great.
Because,
Yeah.
you can ask for pie in the sky, but the money may not be available, the infrastructure may not be available, the market may not be available for delivering today someone coming in and saying, I want to do 20-story condo towers in Harriman.
Okay.
Does that make?
No, that's
Does that
exactly
help?
right. I want to make sure, because, again, you're going to have that conflict between
Yeah.
what the city wants, what the developer wants, and then really what is
Yeah, and this
going to be allowed with everything, all
Yes,
the
and this
constraints that are on you.
system puts parameters around those negotiations because you don't want it to be a free-for-all.
Nice. Okay.
What's important to note as it pertains to the lot plan is that you're dealing with the land and then qualifying the building that can be, in essence, assigned to the land by the lot plan process. And when you look at building types, this is an array of building types going from low intensity to high intensity. understanding that within the context of a given block, some of these are going to be appropriate and others aren't going to be. They're just not going to, they're not going to pair well. But there are opportunities to actually pair things that we did, decades ago that we simply have made illegal today. This is an example of, this is an 8-unit apartment building in the Avenues in Salt Lake City. And I want you to consider its scale. It's a 2-story building. I've seen single-family detached residential bigger than this. I'm sure all of you have as well. This sits on the same street as a single-family home right next door to it. This system would allow for this type of pairing on a residential street. I'm not aware of any zoning that you have in your city that would allow this to happen right now. And yet there are reasons why this type of an opportunity would be so valuable
Would
socially.
that technically be like a block 1, block 2 beside each other, or is
No,
it just no one block could potentially have that?
What this is about the relation of the lot types. And you're
Oh, okay.
probably looking at one of the middle lot types where this would start to allow itself to occur. But what's cool about it is you're providing 2 different housing types directly next door to each other within the same scale.
It allows for a lot better with your affordable housing requirements, to be able to intersperse this, and, I mean, we talked about that, not having carve out one area just for affordable housing. It can be intermixed within the, I like that as a part of that.
How does this fit with SB 34? You probably know SB 34. Does this help meet more requirements of SB 34?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've spent the past month working on an affordable housing plan for a Wasatch Front city. That's now a requirement, as you know, it's as part of your general plan.
Yep.
And when you look at the initiatives that are set out by SB 34, some of the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, for delivering an affordable housing plan are actually provided by this type of a system. And doing it in a way that is going to be acceptable by the community as a whole. Because you're not creating conflict in terms of, okay, we've got to deliver 300 affordable housing units. Where are they going to go and in what form? And they're probably going to be an apartment. They're going to go over here. The neighbors are going to fight it. This is about providing the opportunity to actually feather and disperse that type of a housing type. Because remember, affordable housing doesn't necessarily have to be in the forms that we're used to seeing it. There are all sorts of residential housing types that are simply off the table because zoning prohibits them. This is providing an opportunity to reintroduce them as long as they're compatible based on the context of the community type, the block type, and the lot types.
And so I think I'm understanding that a lot better, but I mean, for instance, I'm looking at these pictures you have right here, which is awesome that you just pulled it up. I guess I'm curious about, does this typically come with a design standard of some sort?
There are
or guidelines.
There are design standards throughout the code. And the thing to remember is a lot of the things that you want to...
I want to still give them flexibility, but have a standard of certain things that we would like to see through it.
And that, and frankly, so that there's a couple answers to that question. One of them is that the issue of design is actually addressed in each step. But it's within the context of what it is that you're dealing with at that time. Because if you're dealing with a community plan, it is irrelevant what color the front door is.
Yeah, and
That's
that's
gonna come
that's not
later.
as much where my mind goes with it as, because the one thing that I viewed very helpful with the Harriman Town Center design guidelines was we as a body were able to say, okay, we need some balconies, we need covered porches, we need, I mean, there were certain things that added a lot to it. And so I'm wondering if there more so is some sort of design guidelines, maybe not necessarily requirements, but allows us to say, okay, you're not meeting enough of the
Yeah.
design guidelines.
So-
These are type of things we need added in here.
Yeah, and the way that that's done, and that's why the issue of a municipality's vision is so critical to this, is there may and will be things that are very important to you as a city
Yeah.
that absolutely need to be calibrated in that code so that they can be measured. And through that measurement, you are, like I referred to earlier, ultimately what you want to deliver is a system that provides flexibility within parameters of certainty. And that's what you would be doing, is delivering design, but you're gonna do it incrementally based on what's in front of you. And the code will actually address that in terms of, okay, we're at the block plan level. What are the aspects of design that we need to account for and make sure that they are addressed in the code specifically?
I guess.
And I've got, again, because I tend to overdo things, I do have slides that actually demonstrate what that looks like. And we could probably, in a sidebar, go through that so you can understand that part of it has been thought through so that when the time comes for calibration, you can actually address it and hard code it in the DNA.
Yeah, I guess.
And I'm not even looking as a hard code, but something that gives it pretty good guidelines.
It needs
not
to
like
be-
absolute, because sometimes the
Right,
absolute
because you
causes
want,
problems.
you don't want it to be so rigid. I mean, but there are aspects that you need to deal with at each step that say, and the thing to remember is, I mean, I would argue that the template code itself, in many instances, will do more in addressing the issues of design that you have to deal with in terms of fighting and negotiating. They're already addressed because you're dealing with aspects that are design related, but within the context of the form that buildings are allowed to be emitted, as an example.
So would like character types like a bungalow versus colonial, is that addressed in a different layer, so to speak? I think kind of to your point that we're getting product type that has the characters for a colonial home, you know, so there's not mixed types and it looks like a weird product, but it meets our guidelines, so to speak.
This is a hidden slide. This is one I wanted to have
Only
available.
share it
and
with
I'm glad
special
I'm-
people, Brody.
Yeah.
I'm glad
Thank
it's
you.
here. So in terms of looking to the left or in terms of going from macro to micro, the planning steps that are required, here are the things that need to be addressed as you dive deeper into the process. The issues of form. So what you're referring to, Brody, is character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the architectural character.
Yeah.
That's something that you're not necessarily going to address at the level of a development area plan. But as you get into the specifics of a community plan, you may want to do that because you want a certain neighborhood to differentiate itself from the other neighborhoods. And the way that you would do that is potentially by setting a palette of architectural styles that are specific to that particular neighborhood.
I mean, one thing I like about the avenues is the homes are totally different from one another, but they have the right character elements for that style that make it work. You know what I mean? And they don't, I don't know. I see where builders try to mix different characteristics of
Right,
home types that
but
don't
their
work.
reason for doing it is because you're requiring them to meet rules of redundancy. They're not doing it to be authentic.
Yeah.
And I think you know it. It'd be disingenuous for them to tell you that that's why they're doing it. They're doing it because they have a requirement to not have redundancy as you move down the street.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, you do it by formula. You've got to have so many floor plans that have so many elevations. You can't put elevation A next to an elevation A. You've got to space. Those are all things that are reactions to a system that doesn't address the issue of form in the zoning itself. So those type of things can absolutely be dealt with and have them be part of the code directly. So
one more question with that. So one of the things that has been brought up in our body before is we have established a standard with brick and stone and so much of the face of it and different things like that that have raised the price on certain products and made it a little more difficult to afford it. And some talks have been making a higher standard for the higher density while decreasing the standard a little bit as we go into larger lots to encourage that, yes, well, there's an option you can actually decrease your cost on the higher lots because let's be honest, a lot of the larger lots are going to build the higher product anyway. And so with some hopes of trying to find the middle ground where you have those 0.2 acres that are more affordable than even the higher density because of the product. And I think Adam is the advocate that's not here that talks about that a little bit, saying we're making it so restrictive, it doesn't make more sense for them to build the 0.2 acres anymore that we don't have the inventory as much for in the city or it's become so expensive that a lot of people can't afford it. So is there like some balancing factor with that as well? Because at the same time, we still are in the corner of a valley.
right.
We do not have these amazing roads that can take us east-west. We can get over to Mountain View a little bit and Bangor, and yeah, if we want to go north-south, we're good. If we want to get over to I-15, we got 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Right now, without the traffic that's coming.
For me, like with our stone and brick requirements, I go back to if the character is right, it doesn't have to be like that. The other elements of that building type stand alone.
Yeah, what I would say, and the way that the template code deals with the issue is that the standard, regardless of the product type, needs to be the same. Reason being, if you're not doing that, then this isn't possible. Those buildings should have the same requirement of materials. And if you look at them closely, that's what's actually.
They're both brick and they both have
Yeah.
the eaves, covered porches. Yeah, very, very similar, even though they look very different.
Yeah, and the reason that is so important is that when you get down to the level of a street, where do a lot of the fights occur as it pertains to the issues of different products today? The standards, if the standards aren't the same, it's hard to say, well, I'm fine inviting an 8-unit apartment building onto my street if it's going to meet the same requirements, building requirements that I have relative to my exterior. So it's having a system that will allow for that type of an emission.
And Michael, just because of time, maybe another 5 minutes, just to wrap up at this point, and we can maybe
Okay.
go over it again another time.
Happy to accommodate that.
Does that work? Does that work?
Yes,
Everybody?
yeah, absolutely.
I think our questions
So,
are extended into.
Yeah.
Whoops. So in terms of, well, it looks like I'm going to work from this view. Hopefully it's okay. Oh wait, here we go. I forgot I can go back to that. So it's important to remember how the other pieces come into this. Open space is delivered from a standpoint of making sure that it's qualified open space. And so what you're seeing in front of you is just a small example of what the code is actually addressing in terms of saying, okay, we are going to qualify the space based on what type it is. And so in this particular example, we've got 4 open space types that tie back and have to qualify themselves to the community type that they're associated with. Because not all open space, in terms of context, is going to work based on whether it's a rural setting or an urban setting. A large regional sports complex is not going to work in an urban setting. On the flip side, you're not going to deliver a plaza in a rural community type. They don't fit. And so what this is doing is it's saying, okay, Mr. Developer, you have a responsibility to deliver X% of open space, and here is how you're going to do it. You have come forward with an urban neighborhood. Your palette for the urban neighborhood and open space types is this. The entire palette is this, but yours is this. And as you come forward with your community plan and your block plans, you're going to show how you're going to deliver open space types or open space based on these types that you're allowed to use. That's one of the change. That's one of the big aspects of this. So here, here's an example, a neighborhood park in terms of its relationship to an urban neighborhood and its means of delivery. Streets are the same thing. I showed you the example of 114th South. Part of what could explain why the facility is different in 2 different locations is its context. So the code actually anticipates the ability of putting different thoroughfare assemblies together based on the community that you're trying to deliver. Next are frontage types. There are 2 frontage types that this code operates under. The first is pedestrian. The relationship of the building to the human being as they move from the sidewalk to the building itself. So this is showing examples from different yards to stoops to terraces, which are more urban, as opposed to more suburban, which would be porch and fence, as an example. This is something that is becoming a lot more prominent because it's addressing that relationship between building and street. The next is something that frankly is extremely important to me, so I added it as part of the code, and that's to address the frontage type of the automobile. There is nothing wrong with a garage to jut out in front of the front facade of a home if the home is large enough. But as the width of the home shrinks, it becomes far less appropriate. And so what this code does is it anticipates and it presents different garage orientation types and establishes the relationship between the garage, the building that's going to be emitted, and where it can be placed on the lot. That is a very, very important element in my opinion, because the garage should not put the human being as the subservient member of the building itself.
Yeah, I
And
think that's why the
what
avenues
often
work
happens
well.
today. What was that?
I just said I think that's why the avenues work well. There's a lot of rear parking.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully I got through all of that.
Oh, I'm sure there's a lot more, but I appreciate it.
I know I could put all of you to sleep if you wanted me to do that. But this is, again, I think in closing, this is a very important issue for all of you to consider, because as you look at your toolbox in terms of dealing with how development occurs in your city, you have an incomplete set of tools. And this potentially provides you another tool to work with that will deliver something that your city, frankly, doesn't have right now. That's the opportunity that you have.
Commissioner Burbert, may I just make 3 quick
Absolutely,
points?
Michael.
One, I want to be really clear for anybody who may be tuning in still or watching this later on Facebook, that we're not talking about trying to introduce an 8-plex into anybody's single-family neighborhood. Okay, this is for new development, large potential areas of development in the future. Plus, the model that you were talking about, we were talking about an urban scale.
Correct.
Which we would largely be talking more about the suburban scale. Another point that we actually didn't get to talk about, but was one of your slides that we missed or went past, was we've often talked about in our MDAs, we want to have a mixture of lot sizes. We want different, larger single-family homes, smaller single-family homes, and we always know that the development always goes to the most dense. Well, you may not have noticed that on one of the screens that he was showing, is that there's a requirement that there's these different lot widths, and you can only have so many of each type. So that's how we say we want variety, and this is a tool that's just one small example of how this tool is effective. You can only have 30% of that kind and 15% of that kind. So it forces the developer to deliver the variety that we've been actually wanting and not getting through our MDAs. So it's just one small example of what this tool can do for us.
And I mean, at least one thing to think about is we do have a couple areas, one that's down off Mountain View that could fall in this category potentially. There's a couple that are east of us, some that are farther up by Porter Rockwell. We still have areas that could fall in this area or a category.
That are already within the city, right?
Yes.
This is what you're talking about, already in the city.
So I appreciate your time. I know you put a lot of work into this, and we can tell.
My pleasure. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk with you tonight.
Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I thought we were going to pull Steve the whole night, but it didn't happen. So, item 5 is if there's any additional chair or commission comments.
I'll hurry, I promise.
Let's do it.
Michael, I know we kind of talked about this. I did not make the last general plan meeting. However, I'm already starting to hear the pushback that people are not aware this is going on. I do not want a repeat of 2 years ago when people do not feel. I know they said they set up at a couple of events. I think the city needs to push this out through social media more somehow because
Yeah, we should be advertising probably next week for our next open house meeting. And also the survey that Y2
surveys.
Analytics is doing has gone out to over 2,000 households in the city this week.
I did get that.
So you'll see more and more information on the general
I
plan.
just know people
Yeah.
were kind of starting to ask questions and
Well,
didn't even know we were working on it again. Didn't know
We've
where
been,
the next was.
and we've had opportunities, and we've also had no one or very few people come. So we'll keep trying. We'll keep trying
I
to
think
get
the
the
big
word out.
challenge is how to communicate now. I mean,
Yeah.
not everybody does social media, but not mail
Yeah,
is
we were
expensive,
out
so-
last weekend, last Saturday, we were out at the rec center on Saturday morning and also in front of Smith's. And we were out there for about 2 hours at each location and had really good feedback, participation. So
That was just a concern that I had heard, so that's all I had.
One other thing, I know we didn't get to the last item of the work session. Did we need to do anything with the setting up for the next Harriman Town Center mixed use discussion?
Oh, yes, I apologize. We want to see if the commission's willing to come in at 5 or 5:30. And we'll,
In 2
again,
weeks?
provide food, in 2 weeks and do a work session on the mixed use portion.
I think it's needed.
Yeah.
Okay, so is 5 o'clock okay, and we'll provide dinner again?
Yes.
17th, yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Great.
great. So there will be a slight change to the future meetings at this point then. We'll just state a time for the Planning Commission. So October 9th, 2019 is City Council meeting at 7 p.m. October 17th, 2019 is Planning Commission meeting, which we will start a work meeting at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
And so there wasn't a
Have
time
that
listed on that.
joint meeting, I think, October 30th with the
Okay.
Planning Commission and City Council.
Okay, October 23rd, 2019, the city council meeting, and we have another meeting before, so we'll probably have it listed at that point, but it sounds like we may have a meeting October 30th, but we'll be able to confirm that before the October 17th city planning meeting. And a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, guys.
I'm at a conference again tomorrow.